Which those kind of movies were, more swashbuckly. They were lighter in tone than what Milius would do with that. So I think, they were more fun. And I think they were trying to go for a similar tone with Conan the Destroyer. And from the sounds of it, from you guys, I don't think it worked for you guys either. It definitely didn't work for me.
I've got plenty of bitching I can do about that one.
So I talked about the introduction of Conan, and then shortly thereafter we get the introduction of Subutai, who's a great character. This one is whole cloth, right out of Milius. I mean, this guy's named after, Genghis Khan's advisor or something. I mean, this is such a Milius kind of thing to do. And then casting Gerry Lopez, a world-famous surfer, in this role, and who had worked on Big Wednesday, which we covered forever ago on the projection booth. Casting him in this and having this whole surfing connection and everything is just amazing. I was going to play this later, but let's go ahead and take another break, and we're going to play back the interview with Gerry Lopez about him being Subutai and about the wide world of surfing.
So, what are we going to talk about?
Well, let's talk a little bit about surfing. I think you know a thing or two about that.
I've been doing it for a little while. Hope I know something.
Is it just the thing to do when you're born in Hawaii to pick up a surfboard?
Well, when I grew up, it was the beach. That was pretty much the only thing to do. And at the beach, it looked like the surfers were having the most fun. It was a pretty easy thing to fall into. Of course, it was a much different world of surfing back then than it is today. I mean, it was a very small world. And, the surfing was, you could say it was more recreational than the seriousness that it approaches today. But it was what we all did in Hawaii back in the 50s and through the 60s.
I read that you were the Hawaii state champ when you were 14 years old.
Well, like I said, it was really a small world. I thought being the Hawaii state champ would, get me something. And I went to, the shop that I used to go to all the time and told the owner I won. He said, "So what?" So what was, kind of gave me an idea of where contests really fit into the big scheme of things, somewhere near the bottom. Consequently, I was never much of a contest surfer after that.
You have appeared in just a ton of documentaries. What was it about the 70s and kind of surf documentaries that went together so well?
Decade of the 70s was really the period in the, again, short history of surfing up till then, that a spot called a pipeline began to be surfed with some degree of success. It was always a beautiful wave, but the equipment limitations just made, in the surf movies previous to that period of time, the pipeline would generally appear in the wipeout section, where the surfboards and the bodies were falling out of the sky, pretty much just because of the design of the surfboards back then. The shape and design really didn't allow for, riding that kind of wave, which was a very steep, fast-breaking wave with any degree of success. And it wasn't until the boards started to go shorter and, the design started to evolve to more of a high-performance style of surfboard that, the wave at the pipeline was, you had a chance of successfully riding it. And I just, happened to be at that period in time of the, evolution of the equipment that, and I liked that kind of wave that, I was featured in a lot of films. And, part of it was that spot, the pipeline, was pretty easy to film because it broke much closer to shore than most of the other breaks. And photogenic aspect, it was a pretty spectacular looking wave, especially, when you fill the whole frame with just the wave, and the surfer either making it or even not making it was still pretty spectacular.
Now, you had a hand in helping to shape the way that surfboards are formed, or I guess shaped themselves. What were boards like before, and then what did you kind of help bring them to be?
Well, when the surfboards went to foam in the mid-50s, that was really the thing that opened surfing up to a lot of people, just because, previously the boards made out of wood were pretty heavy. And once they started making them out of foam, then, girls started surfing, and guys that were just beginning started to have, some success at it. And in the late 60s, the surfboard shape started to go smaller, shorter in length. And it was, in that time, I guess it was about 1968 that I started making my own surfboards rather than, going to a surf shop and buying them, one made by somebody else. And at that point in time, it also gave me a livelihood. I mean, it was a job, not one that my parents had hoped that I'd have, but one nonetheless, where, I was able to support myself to be able to go surfing pretty full-time basis just by making surfboards, and also to advance my own, skill level at it just by virtue of the fact that, I could build boards that fit the style of surfing I wanted to do and was attempting to do, and specifically at that place called the Pipeline, which coincidentally happened to be photographed quite a bit through that period as well. And so that allowed me to I guess garner some fame, so to speak, and become kind of known through the then small world of surfing. And, that wave is still kind of the measure of all the top surfers in the world today, and the contests that they have there, which, dates back to, I guess, 1970 or 71 maybe was the first one. Back then, that contest, the Pipe Bastards event, only had 6 guys in it, so it wasn't much of a contest back then, but today it's, one of the biggest ones in the world of surfing.
How did you and John Milius meet?
John was making a film called Big Wednesday that was, kind of a story about him growing up as a surfer in the Malibu area, and, the characters that he ran across. And part of that film was the whole, I guess it started in the early 60s and evolved through the early 70s. So, it was about a decade in time. And he phoned me up one day because he had written in the story that the main character would meet, who in his heyday was the top surfer. Then as he got older and, got married and had kids and got a job and wasn't able to go surfing on the regular basis that he had when he was younger, a big, great day of surf comes along. And of course, he goes out on that day and meets me, who's the new kid on the block, so to speak. And, it was just kind of John's fantasy. And anyway, he phoned me up one day, and I was familiar with some of his pictures, but I hadn't known him really or known anything about him, except that I found out later that I really enjoyed a number of his movies up till then, and asked me if I'd like to be in the film, and I went, sure, why not? I mean, what do I have to do? He goes, well, come on over and I'll tell you all about it. So I flew, I was on Maui when he called, and I flew over to California, and from that moment forward, we became friends and became, pretty close. We had a lot in common. We loved storytelling and loved, history and loved surfing. And so we had a lot to talk about.
Now, had you done any acting to that point, or were you just...
No, none at all.
How did he work with you in front of the camera?
He didn't expect much from me. He was a great director. He, that day that I met him in the studio at Warner Brothers, Jan Michael Vincent came in, and we met, and, we also became friends and started hanging out together. And when it came time for, the few little parts that I had in Big Wednesday, John, of course, gave me some direction, but he had actually spoken to Jan to kind of, help me get through the scenes. And, looking back, there was never really, like I said, much expected of me. And it was pretty easy. I mean, it wasn't any Academy Award performance, but, I was comfortable. I didn't get all nervous and blow my lines or anything.
How did you go from that smaller part to such a bigger role in something like Conan the Barbarian?
Well, again, that was John. We had been spending more and more time together and doing, lots of things. And that project came along, and he, I guess there was a script that Oliver Stone had written, and, John read it and pretty much rewrote the whole thing. And in doing so, wrote in a part for the character that I played. And when he wrote that part, he wrote it with me in mind, and when he told me he was doing that, I went and gave me the script to read. I went, geez, this is kind of a big deal. I don't think I can do that. And he goes, yeah, you can do it. And he sent me to, Mako had a school for Asian actors, and he sent me there. And I spent quite a bit of time with Mako, and, I don't think I ever learned how to act, but with Arnold and Sandal, none of us could act, kind of got along real well through the filming and just kind of stumbled our way through it. And, Mako was there most of the time and went along pretty well. And John, of course, was a great director too. I mean, he always managed to put us all at ease. Even Sandal, who was a little high-strung at times, to get through the different days of shooting, and at the end, it actually came out kind of good.
What was the atmosphere like on set for you guys?
Oh, it was fun. I mean, for all of us, it was a huge deal for all of us, too. I mean, Sandal had done chorus line, so she was used to, a big production. But she had quite a role in Conan, and the way I think we all bonded outside of the filming was we spent a lot of time learning how to use the swords with Yamazaki, and that was something that really carried over into the film. And again, that was really brilliant and certainly clever on John's part, because he was the one who set that all up. And I don't know if he had that in mind, when he did originally set that up and put us together with Yamazaki, I mean, months before we ever started filming. But it was something that really paid off, so that we were always really comfortable with each other on the sets. Even Well, especially when, we were in the presence of Max and James Earl Jones, who, needless to say, are as good of actors as actors can be. I think that was something that John kind of paved the way for us to be able to get through these roles and kind of be believable in them. I don't know how he figured that out, but it really paid off. I mean, we all became, like I said, not only really comfortable with each other, but pretty good friends too. Just, playing with those swords together with Yamazaki, day after day. It was kind of a fun thing. Yeah, we spent 6 months in Spain. Most of it was shot in and around Madrid. And then the last 2 months, we went down to the Mediterranean coast there at a place called Almeria, where John had filmed a lot of The Wind and the Lion. And that was really almost the best part of the whole shoot. Just because we were all staying kind of on a golf course right on the ocean there, and there was actually even surf. And I had brought a surfboard with me. It didn't get wet for 4 months in Madrid, but any chance to get away, the last 2 months I was out there paddling around.
Yeah, you must have been itching to get back to it, I'm sure.
At that point in my life, that was the longest time that I had ever spent away from the ocean. Just that 4 months straight in Madrid. Still, it was really fun. That whole production was really just a outstanding experience. I think for all of us. I think all of us enjoyed it just immensely. Ben Davidson had a great role there. He was a terrific character. We spent a lot of time together. Yamazaki spent a lot of time, and he and I used to get on the bus in Madrid, and it was really kind of foolproof. We didn't know where we were going, but the bus would stop right outside of our apartment, and we'd hop on the bus and ride it, till we saw something interesting. Then we'd get off and poke around, and anytime we wanted to go home, we'd just cross the street, and the bus would be coming back the other way and take us right back to where we started from. So we got to drive all over Madrid in the bus and, had a wonderful time.
What was Mako like to work with?
Terrific. What a pro. But at the same time, what a down-to-earth guy. I've always kind of had my own diet and, lifestyle. And so especially when we were in Madrid, I had an apartment that had a kitchen and did all my own cooking. And, Arnold would come over, and John used to, say, well, we're going to eat Viet Cong, because basically it's just brown rice and vegetables, tofu, sometimes some fish. They'd come over and, when they weren't out going for a big giant dinner, they'd come over and eat with me. But Mako didn't actually come until the last 2 months when we moved down to, I think he was there for a little bit at the end of the shoot in Madrid, and then mostly in Almeria. When we moved there, almost everyone stayed in the hotel on the golf course, but Rafaela got me a little apartment that had a kitchen in it because she knew, I liked to make my own food. So Mako would come over and, he'd eat my simple, brown rice and vegetables. And one day he said, you know what, I'm going to cook for you tonight. And I go, oh, okay. He goes, yeah, when I first came to America, that's how I survived. I didn't know how to cook, but I told him I did. And got a job as a chef. He was marooned in New York when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and he couldn't get back to Japan. And, that was how he survived. It was, any odd job he could, but they were, he saw a sign that they wanted a chef, and so he applied for the job and learned how to cook and actually became quite a cook. And he spent this one day, all day, preparing all these exotic dishes. And that night, John and Arnold and I think Sammon came over and ate all this really great food that Mako had made. He sat there, he didn't eat a thing. And I go, well, aren't you hungry? He goes, no, I've been picking at it all day. I'm not hungry. When you make it, you never get hungry. You know, we remained friends after that, and I go out to see him every once in a while, and really a terrific guy. I got an image of him in my mind right now.
It seems like he would have had a really good laugh.
He did. Yeah, I think he really enjoyed life. You know, he had a tough break at one point, but made the most out of it. And, you know, made quite a success of himself. Really a terrific guy. And, you know, I don't know if you were familiar with his acting school, but quite a few, you know, actors, Asian actors, got their start through Mako. And, you know, John knew about it, and John had sent me there, and I'd go there 3 or 4 nights a week, and these guys were all real serious, you know, and I'm just going, man, what am I doing here? I'm way out of my depth here. You know, I think the most fun John and I had was, you know, you got a lot of free time working on a movie, and he and I started making model airplanes in the trailer. And man, I'd scour the city. You know, I knew where every store that sold model airplanes was, and I'd get all these planes, you know, and then we'd build them together and paint them all up. Had a great time doing that.
What'd you guys do with them after you're all done?
Actually, I took them all home because they were really kind of beautiful. I mean, after that, all my surfboard designs, I started using these camouflage patterns that, you know, were actually authentic patterns that we research and paint on the, you know, the proper patterns on the proper airplanes. I started painting them on my surfboards, and it's kind of been my trademark ever since then.
So what was this like? You had the smaller role in Big Wednesday, and now you're one of 3 leads in what I seem to remember was a fairly big-budget action film. Did this help open any doors for you? Did you get noticed from this role?
Well, I got to go on the David Letterman show and got to meet Merv Griffin, go on his show. Was asked by someone who knew John that was an agent if I was interested in, you know, pursuing a career in acting. And I said, well, what do I need to do? And she said, well, the first thing you need to do is you have to move here to Los Angeles. And I go, well, I live in Maui. And she goes, well, no, but you need to be here, you know, for casting calls and readings and, you know, meeting people. So you have to live here. And I thought about that for not very long. And I went, you know what? I think I'd rather live in Maui. That was kind of it, you know, until John wanted to do the Farewell to the King. Then, you know, off we went to Borneo and, you know, spent a couple months down there.
What was that shoot like? It just seems like it must have been, from an outsider, it seems like it might have been a little wild.
Well, you know, a lot of the locations were kind of in the jungle there, and I don't know if you've ever been to Borneo, but it's quite a jungle. And it was, you know, right on the equator there, so it's hot. It was tough for John and especially for Frank McRae, you know. I think Frank, part of it might have been my cooking, but he lost, I think, 80 or 90 pounds, you know, just in those couple of months. He could afford to lose that weight. He was big. He's a big man. But, you know, most of it, he just sweated off. It was tough. But, you know, I had spent quite a bit of time down in not that particular area, but further south, you know, in Bali and Java. And I was kind of used to the climate. And, you know, I loved the people, and I loved just the whole culture of that area. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
So did I rewrite that you've given up, well, I won't say given up, but you've kind of switched out surfing for snowboarding?
Oh, no. I just snowboard as well. Yeah, I'm kind of an obsessive kind of guy, And for a while, I really got into snowboarding and, in fact, moved the whole family from Maui to Central Oregon. But, the surfing reasserted itself. I came to my senses, and realized that I'm a surfer primarily, and I snowboard sometimes.
After the ocean swallowed Atlantis, and before recorded history, there was an age when mythical kingdoms spread across an uncharted world. This was the age of Conan. Enslaved as a boy, Conan grew into a warrior. He escaped to encounter mystery, magic, and myth, while forever facing the ultimate master of sorcery. Lover, friend, hero. His destiny was to free the oppressed and become a king by his own hand. Conan.
All right, thanks to Gerry Lopez for taking the time to talk to us. Fantastic. He was a great, great person to talk to. And so many amazing non-actors in this film. I mean, really, we had seen Arnold in other things. He had been acting for a while.
No mortal is superior to Hercules. I am the son of Zeus. As I've told you, I'm Hercules, the son of Zeus.
Again, I think they play to his strengths with so much of this film, play to Gerry Lopez's strengths. I would not have thought that this was only one of his, first film roles. Big Wednesday, before that he'd been in a lot of documentaries and everything, but yeah, he's right there with the best. And then the introduction shortly thereafter of Valeria, who's played by Sandal Bergman, again, I thought she was a seasoned actress. She does such a good job in this role. And the three of them, again, not just relying on Arnold for being the hero of the film, to have this kind of team approach to it, I thought was great. The heist, quote unquote, of the Eye of the Serpent. Oh, such a great, great scene. And, really kind of taking a lot of stuff from the Tower of the Elephant story by Robert E. Howard and just, doing what they need to do with it and turning it into the snakes and, really, again, in the Stone stuff, we don't have the whole idea of the snake cult. And I think that is really what works so well, and we get those moments throughout the film. I mean, we get the snake banner at the beginning, we get the wolf woman talking about snakes later on, and then kind of bringing us back into it with the Tower of Set and having the snakes in there and everything. So from there on out, it kind of becomes more of this story of revenge, because Arnold's kind of finding his way as we go through here. We talked about his introduction. We didn't talk necessarily about the pit fighting stuff. Some great, great scenes in there. And definitely that whole section provides us with one of the most quotable lines from Conan the Barbarian. You want to talk about amazing dialogue. I mean, right there, prime Milius with the whole idea of what is best in life.
To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women.
Another thing he lifted directly from Genghis Khan, because I believe that in line was a variation of something that Khan said.
Gerry Lopez, I agree, he was perfect for that part. And he needed that big-ass mustache. I've seen him in other photos without a mustache. He looks weird to me. It's like seeing Sam Elliott in Frogs before he had the mustache. He doesn't look right.
Though the sad thing is about Gerry Lopez is apparently they didn't trust his vocals, so they decided to redub all of his dialogue by Sab Shimono. It is kind of unfortunate because you love the performance that he's giving, but you wonder how much of it is him and how much of it is Shimono.
Because you see him in the documentary on the DVD, and he's very quiet and soft-spoken. And then Subutai is very not that.
The final piece in the the chain here is Mako as the wizard, who we've heard, again, this is great. He's the last person introduced in this film, but he's the guy who we've been hearing throughout the entire movie, which I think, again, I know Arnold was supposed to be the narrator originally, but I think that use of Mako's voice is fantastic. And then to have him be the guy who we meet last, out in this kind of wasteland and everything, I thought was a really smart idea.
I kind of like to pretend that Mako's playing the same character in Highlander 3. There can be only one!
And his narration, it really helps kind of feed into the whole Howard's view of Conan and view of his stories, because he would refer to his stories as yarns. These were supposed to be basically stories that people told around the campfire. So it makes sense that we are discovering about Conan not through his own words, but from the deeds that other people tell about him.
Which also kind of helps as far as like the fuzziness of some of these stories, or that some of these unbelievable things happen. And I like that Conan lives in a world where magic is possible. And I like, though, too, that Mako's playing a wizard, and other than the one scene, the one like very Qui-Gon influence scene, we don't see him doing a lot of wizardry. I'm expecting him at the end to just like, okay, yeah, I'm going to start casting some spells here.
I think that's probably the best thing, because they did make him do wizardry in the next film, and we all know how that worked out.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of symbolism in the film, and a lot of symbolism that I think people... just someone looking for a barbarian action flick is not going to pick up. Like when I can't remember what Sven-Ole Thorsen's dad's name, what the character's name was, the Oakland Raider guy, but he's got Conan's father's sword from all those years ago. And when Conan's battling him, he breaks the sword as he kills him, and is symbolic. He has now exacted almost all of his revenge. He's no longer in his father's shadow. Or I'm just reading way too much into a battle scene.
Oh, no. That scene was definitely very thick with the theme and imagery. And it fits into the whole one of the central themes of this entire movie, the riddle of steel. In the beginning, Conan's father told him that it was you can only trust steel, that it is stronger than men. You cannot trust men. Then later on, Conan's other father figure, his twisted father figure, Thulsa Doom, tells him that steel is nothing as opposed to the hand that wields it, that the flesh is stronger. And by the end, Conan comes to realize that as strong as steel is, it's nothing compared to the man behind it. And that's what we're seeing in this entire film, the forging of a weapon. It just so happens that this weapon is a man.
Or the fact that sword was made by men, by his father. The sword Conan is using is that sword that he stole from, I guess you'd call it the Atlantean king, when he found his corpse, that maybe there's something about this sword is not made by man.
I don't know. I mean, I've always interpreted that particular scene to be being highlighting the overcoming of a person, it kind of feeds into the whole Nietzschean quote that we get in the beginning, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. And even Milius's commentary suggests that this entire film is essentially the making of a man, the forging of a weapon in the form of Conan himself.
Well, I also see it as not only, steel is something that you can trust, flesh is what is more powerful than steel, but by this time, Conan has surrounded himself with, two living friends, and then having Valeria, whose love is so strong that she actually comes back from the dead to help save him at this point.
Something she foreshadowed earlier as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just to have those, that support here on Earth and everything is just it's not just the man, but the people that he surrounds himself with, I think, are what also gives him the strength that he needs to be able to stand up to this guy, to break the sword, and to reclaim that power, and to make himself the fully realized human being that he is.
Yeah, I think this film it provides an interesting exploration of, again, returning to the Nietzschean themes, but Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, where it's more than just this Superman character. In Nietzsche's philosophy, the Übermensch is designed to be the bringer and provider of morals in a world where God does not exist. You know, Nietzsche said that God is dead, so morality must flow from somewhere. In his opinion, it comes from the Übermensch figure, this man who by deed and will alone has transcended other humanity and gone on to influence and inspire the people around him. And we see him tear down these religious institutions that he's around. You know, Thulsa Doom representing the ultimate corruption of religion. And that by the end of the film, it is Conan's actions alone that is able to completely liberate all of these followers of Doom, sending them out into the world. It's a somewhat melancholy theme or feeling of that scene, but it's also tinged with a bit of hope.
Also the fact that Conan, Subutai, and Valeria are able to do things no one else could. Again, going to the symbolism, they cut the head off the snake. That they're the only people in the world, in this entire world, that are willing to stand up to Thulsa Doom. Now, at that point, they're doing it because they're thieves, but they're still standing up. They're doing something no one else has had the balls to do. And then they even got Valeria's funeral pyre to light, even though Mako said no fire will burn there. The four winds are too strong. And yet his love for her and her love for him allows her funeral pyre to light. They're doing things that should not be able to be done.
Crime laps with your four winds.
Again, kind of feeding back to certain Nietzschean themes, the idea of tearing down institutions and establishing a new morality. I mean, hell, in the movie alone, Conan rejects the religion that he was born into, and that speech on the battle before the mounds, where he entreats Crom, and then it ends it by saying, "And if you don't listen, then to hell with you," implying that if you're not going to help me, I'm just going to do this myself.
I also want to point out the special effects.
Oh, yes.
There's nobody that is ever going to be able to convince me that all the sequences with that snake, 100% animatronic fake snake, could be done better in CGI.
So good.
Well, it has so 100% realistic throughout the entire. You never once doubt that they are fighting an actual giant snake.
Yeah, it has weight to it. It has a presence in the frame, and even more so. And it's also an effect they use to great effect in the when they're fighting regular people. But the bags of blood and the bladders of blood that they put in all of these things, so every hit just releases a torrent of blood. It's so beautiful.
That blood also was getting the stuntmen drunk.
Yeah, because was it liquor based?
No, it was freezing because of where they were shooting, so they thinned it out with vodka. So it was Milius said it was a while till he started realizing that stuntmen kept coming back for more and more blood, and he realized these motherfuckers are getting drunk. They were getting drunk drinking all the fake blood.
That's hilarious.
The King Osric scene, speaks to everything that you're just talking about as far as them being the ones who are taking out Thulsa Doom, doing something that nobody else is doing. And I love that scene, Max von Sydow playing King Osric.
What daring! What outrageousness! What insolence! What arrogance! I salute you.
He's the one who kind of kicks the story finally, you could almost say finally into gear, because before that we've had just like adventures. We've had kind of this plot going on with, Conan looking for the snakes and meeting all these people, but it isn't until Osric kind of gives them a purpose to say, save my daughter, you can have all the riches you want. It isn't until then that we really kick things into high gear, and then it becomes this almost like like we could have the intermission at this point and then come back, and now it's Conan's quest to save the princess, kill Thulsa Doom, disband the followers, all this kind of stuff. And I love the way that Milius just worked with the pacing of all this kind of stuff, because sometimes I forget just how much adventure there is in this film. It's like, oh yeah, they still haven't put on the black and white paint yet. Oh, they haven't done this. We haven't seen Thulsa Doom, with the snake arrows yet. I mean, there's so many great set pieces to this film.
There's also the theme of betrayal as well. Because King Osric, one of his contemporaries, who was following Thulsa Doom, betrayed the contemporary and stabbed him in the heart with that special dagger. And his daughter was going to do the same thing to him. And then there's the betrayal of when Osric's daughter, when she realizes that Thulsa Doom's going to kill her, she switches sides because she realizes she's been betrayed. And then Thulsa Doom thinks Conan's going to join him, and he has this look of betrayal when Conan hacks his head off instead. There's also the theme of betrayal by a parental figure.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing that scene speaks to is a theme that you would see in a lot of the Howard stories about Conan. The concept of barbarians rising up to supplant civilization and then becoming civilized, becoming weak, only to be supplanted by the next wave of barbarians. They describe Osric that, in his youth he was much like Conan, but he had become old and sotted. And there's even a deleted scene where we see him get mowed down by his guards that had been corrupted by Thulsa Doom. So that's one of the few times that the themes of this story, it's actually very much in line with some of the central themes that Howard was playing with. The idea of civilization versus barbarism, and how civilization will weaken barbarians, allowing them to be taken over by the next wave of barbarians, and so the cycle continues.
On that note, there's also the fact that Thulsa Doom is creating a new civilization, arguably more, in quotes, civilized, and it takes a barbarian and a barbaric act of violence to show people that he was the false god.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see Thulsa Doom as being very, very Manson-esque, especially when we have the children of Doom, Doom's children, when they're helping him find where Thulsa Doom is.
Helter Skelter, da-na-na-na-na-na.
And how much of the view and the movie's take on the Children of Doom do you think it was Milius taking pot shots at hippies?
Oh, totally.
Well, there's no doubt about that. That scene where he's got all the flowers around him, that is a shot at hippies. That is an unabashed right shot at hippies. There's no even interpretation needed for that.
Though, again, it brings to mind a quote from the Milius documentary where he admitted that I'm a hippie at heart, they just wouldn't make me their king.
It's good to be the king.
Oh, it's such an incredible movie. It's one that over the years, it's been interesting to see other people's responses to it. And even going back to reading the early critical response, that a lot of people were saying that it was fascistic in nature. They were talking about, this Aryan character going up against, a black man, and that a lot of the
scenes... Those are the same complaints against Dirty Harry.
Oh, sure. And there a lot of the scenes they feel are reminiscent of Riefenstahl and, Triumph of the Will and all that thing. To me, if you have that interpretation of Conan, I really need to have a conversation with you, because at the end of the film, it is so anti-fascistic that the ultimate depiction of fascism in this movie, Thulsa Doom, is destroyed. I think it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what Milius was doing, and also a fundamental misunderstanding of some of the Nietzschean themes he was playing with. The Nazis had a thing for Nietzsche, so a lot of people have applied Nazi ideology to Nietzsche, where his own philosophy was somewhat different.
I also want to point out something about the presentation of Conan. This movie has to be seen widescreen. Now, since I did not see this in the theater, I saw it on HBO or Showtime, whichever one debuted it first, full frame. Then the VHS was full frame. And I didn't see this widescreen until the early 90s when I got it on Laserdisc. And it's just amazing how much more the widescreen opens up the picture. You have to see this widescreen. This is not one you can watch on TNT. You can't watch this movie on TBS or A&E. You can't, because it's like almost like a Michael Mann film. It's composed for the full 16:9 screen, and he uses all of it.
Oh, that brings to mind a question. Which version of the film did you see? You know, what format did you watch this movie on? Blu-ray, DVD?
The one I watched last night was the DVD, but the Laserdisc was not the director's cut yet, and I watched the hell out of that one in the 90s.
For the first time, I watched the expanded version, I think today, the one with that little bit more dialogue between Subutai and Conan before they go into the final battle, which I had never seen that scene before until today, so that was kind of nice.
The ending is somewhat extended as well.
Exactly, and it's one reason that I have yet to pick this movie up on Blu-ray, even though I'm sure that it would look fantastic on Blu-ray, because for whatever reason, the Blu-ray, despite the fact that they say it's the extended edition, they drop that scene, that spring breeze scene, that calm before the storm where Subutai and Conan reflect upon how different their lives would be if they had followed a different path, where they would be. And I don't know why they decided to drop that out of the Blu-ray release, but as it stands, the only way you can get that is on the old DVD release, which is a disc I've had for well over a decade now.
The one with that ugly pink cover. I don't know what the hell they were thinking of that, though.
Oh, God, that was terrible.
Yeah, it was not a great
It looks like
cover.
somebody puked in Photoshop. You've got that gorgeous painting, so let's not use that.
I don't know what they were thinking with that, but the sad fact is that unless you get, I believe the Region 2 Blu-ray has that scene available, but if you're Region 1 only in the United States, the most complete and best version of the film, in my opinion, is that extended edition on the DVD, for now.
To be fair, though, if you do pick up the old Laserdisc, which has the correct cover art, I might add, the old Laserdisc, it might not be the extended edition, but it's a nice, proper widescreen version as well.
A lot of people had complaints about the way that the movie was handled as far as those times where they would get away from the Robert E. Howard stuff and go into more, I don't know, for lack of a better term, cinematic kind of stuff. The whole idea of Conan's upbringing, what it was like for him, and really that whole, the Wheel of Pain. A lot of people had problems with that, and the opening with the village and everything, and it's like, I don't know if we could have started off any other place than doing that to have this epic story.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a protagonist in this sort of plot where you are following the hero from, early beginnings to the end. You have to have a compelling beginning. And revenge is a very compelling plot engine. Now, that's to take nothing away from Howard, but the stories he were writing were intended to be more or less standalone yarns. But if you're going to build, a complete plot introducing the world to Conan, I think this was the best way to do it. Yes, it violates some of the spirit of Conan, and it definitely violates a lot of the text, but in my opinion, it's all done for the betterment of the plot, and it was a fantastic plot.
I think it also adds an extra character arc because he starts off a victim, then becomes a slave, and is raised as a slave, and then he's used as an automaton for the pit fighting, and the whole thing is supposed to be made a king by his own hand. That it's part of his arc. He overcame all of that and literally changed society by beheading Thulsa.
Yep. And so many of the Howard stories where Conan stumbles upon something. There would be these diabolical plots.
He was David Banner going from town to town and just helping people as he wanted. The original stories were very much the 70s Incredible Hulk show.
Oh, yeah. So by setting up the background of Conan in the film, it gives him a personal investment into defeating Thulsa Doom. And I love the fact that the first time that we see Conan meet Thulsa Doom, he is completely broken. He's broken in body, he's broken in spirit, and he loses. He is bloody, battered, and then nailed onto the tree of woe.
He's technically killed.
A great way to do it. Oh yeah, technically.
He's technically killed.
That's why we got that
because they have to kind of bring him back.
Yeah, through that whole Qui-Gon influence scene.
Which again, something that another filmmaker might not have known about or might not have done, and it was a nice way to bring in. You've got freaking Mako there, so let's bring in some Eastern influence magic when we have this, and he's a magician, so I think that was a perfect thing. The other thing that people were complaining about was the whole idea Oh, the animation is fantastic during that part. And just so nice and subtle.
Things, that line animation, you know, if that same scene were done today, it'd be a bunch of crappy CG looking like something out of a Voyager episode, and it would not work. That line animation gave them a very ethereal, not of this world feel.
And apparently they were originally going to go with an effect that was closer to the ghost scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, because I believe it was the same special effects studio working on it. But the producers said, no, this looks too much like Raiders. Give us something different, which influenced the guys to go back and do this animation. And I always loved that look, you know, drawing directly on the movie frame and adding those animated elements, and the way they blended it in with the red filter that was going on, it didn't look out of place at all. It looked of a piece with what was going on in the film.
Because I've seen younger people in modern DVD reviews actually point that out as a piece of bad special effects, and I'm like, I am going to hit you in the dick.
Well, some of it might just be what you grew up with. I have an affection for that kind of special effects, just like I have an affection for the optical effects in Ghostbusters. There's something infinitely appealing to the look of those kind of effects. But part of that might also be because I discovered those effects when I was a child, so it's a nostalgic quality.
The other thing that people really had a problem with was the whole idea of, I think the character's just named just as red hair having to push Conan away when he frees him finally. I know in one of the drafts of the script, I think it might have been a Milius draft of it, there's an earthquake and the cage that Conan is in breaks open, and that's how he gets away and goes off into the world. But I know people are like, oh, no, Conan isn't like that. He wouldn't have to chase them away to, you know, free him. But I think the voiceover explains it well enough.
Oh, yeah. As Mako said, he was like a dog who had been kept too long. And I think by setting up the scene that way, we get that wonderful scene where he discovers the Atlantean sword, and he does free himself. Now, it's more of a philosophical and emotional freedom, but we do get that scene where he decides, I am going to be a slave no more, as he strikes down his own shackles and then
literally cuts the chain.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he turns those wolves into clothing.
Again, a subtle moment. Nowadays, you would see him fighting the wolves. All you need to see is you hear the wolves coming from off camera. He grasps the sword. He kind of glints at the camera. And then the next scene, he's covered in wolf pelts.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing that Milius said about even a lot of the fights. I mean, looking right at the beheading of Conan's mother, you don't see the beheading. You see her fall. You see the head fall. To not show the violence sometimes is more effective than to show the violence. It's even more horrifying than actually seeing it on screen.
I think the decision not to show more in that scene was one that arrived in the editing process, because if I'm reading it correctly, they actually had made an animated or an animatronic decapitated head that could, move. Its eyes could move, its tongue could move. So by filming it the way they did, not showing the aftermath of the violence, that the focus of the camera is this young child just looking at his hand. He doesn't even look at his mother. He looks at his hand, and then he shares a look with Thorsen, all without dialogue. All we have is physical performance and that Basil Polidorus score. Anybody who says that this is not the work of a talented filmmaker, that this film is simply, disposable crap with no craft, I don't think they're paying attention.
I think those people saw the sequel.
One more thing that they cut out of this movie that I've always noticed since I was a kid watching this movie: at no time in the entire runtime of this movie do they give Sandal Bergman a name.
No.
She's credited as Valeria, but they never say her name throughout the entire runtime of this movie.
I don't know if that was an intentional thing, but the character of Valeria is from, I can't remember if it's from the Howard stories, but it's definitely from the Marvel Comics stuff. So that probably was a carryover from when Roy Thomas was still a screenwriter, or one of his drafts.
All right, on to the commentary, because it is one of my favorite film commentaries ever.
Oh, I know a lot of people talk about how great the commentary is for Total Recall, and I think Commando he's not on, but Arnold gives commentary like nobody else. Like really, you should probably just have a separate Arnold commentary track and then have the Milius track, because Milius can't get a fucking word in edgewise, and Arnold just sits there like he's never seen the film before. He's just like,
exactly.
Oh, look at that. Oh, do you remember that?
Oh,
do you remember that?
And he's misremembering a lot of it, too. He's adding lines of dialogue that aren't there. He's radically changing scenes in his, and this is the scene where, oh, wait, that's not this. It's like, where the hell did you get that from? How drunk are you?
Wasn't in the sequel, bud. It wasn't here. What are you thinking? Yeah.
Well, and he's got that famous where he remembers a line going,
and now Sven says, I could not masturbate them at all, Master. He said, no, it's that I could not harm them at all, Master.
You could not masturbate me, Master? Oh, wait, that's not the line. What the fuck was that supposed to be?
And he's got that kind of like weird like homophobia thing going on at times too, where it's just like, what is that kid? Is he wearing lipstick?
A lot of homophobia in it too, yeah.
Oh man, yeah, it was just bizarre and it was so disruptive. I was like, after a while, I was just like, all right, I guess I'm in this for those few little Milius nuggets that he gives us, and he does speaking some poetry here and there, but oh my God, it was just too much Arnold, man, just all over the place.
Oh no. I can't believe it. He is so sick, John. That is so funny.
There is one moment in the commentary where he does make an interesting point when he was discussing the scene where after Conan had been resurrected, and he's drawing his sword, and he was commenting. I believe he was saying that he was influenced on that scene from a Humphrey Bogart movie. But it was a man who was, had gone through a similar situation. He was drawing his gun and learning how to use it again. So it was showing that he did put some thought into some aspects of his performance. And the funny thing is, when you learn about Arnie, he is a very smart guy. So you wonder how much of his stuff he did in the commentary was him just doing a put on. That, people expect him to be dumb, and he's not taking it very seriously, so he's going to have a good time with it. But there is so much more going on in that guy's head than a lot of people give him credit for.
Look at Gerry Lopez's hairstyle. What happened to him there?
Well, yeah, he was such a driven individual. I mean, this guy, he's very much like Conan. Again, he makes himself. He has crafted his body. He has crafted his career. All the movie choices that he has done over the years. Some of them have been missteps, yes, but he's always come back with what needs to happen next. When he knows that he's got a good thing, he keeps doing it. I mean, to have this poor Austrian immigrant guy coming over and becoming the governor of California, I mean, this is just amazing that this guy could do this, It just...
If they were to do a new commentary with, say, maybe just John Milius, would you want just an informational one? Because I've noticed the best kind of commentaries are like John Carpenter's The Thing, where Kurt Russell and John Carpenter get together. They obviously haven't seen the movie in a long time, and they're sitting there just drinking beer, sharing anecdotes, and watching a movie that they made together 30 years ago. That's a good kind of commentary. That's kind of what I wanted for Conan. I agree with you, Mike, that Arnold kind of does dominate it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want some journalist there sucking Milius's dick throughout the commentary, like, oh, that was such an interesting shot. Can you tell me more about? I don't need that, but yeah, maybe just putting Milius with, I don't know, somebody else. Maybe hell, put him with Pressman, put him with Roy Thomas. Give me something else, just give me a little something. Well, hell, put him with Sven-Ole Thorsen. I mean, that guy, very well-spoken guy. So, actually, on that note, let's go ahead. We're going to take a break and play an interview with Sven-Ole Thorsen, who is Thorgrim himself.
Wow, I remember now this scene also.
How did you get into bodybuilding?
When I was about 16, I was invited by my cousin and a friend, 17 I was, to a gym in Copenhagen called Club Roma, where they worked out with weights. And until then, I had been playing handball and soccer and track and field. I was always had a problem with, teammates. They didn't show up on time. They didn't have the same energy I had, etc. So after being in that gym for 3 hours, I fell in love with weight training. And I remember when I left the gym there, I could barely walk. For a whole week I was lying in bed because my whole body was reacting. And I said to myself, I want to do this. So I made a decision there when I was about 17, 18, that I want to commit to this and spend 10 years to be the biggest and the strongest and the baddest ass in the world. So in 10 years, I was able to go from 181 pounds to 340 pounds.
When did you start competing in competitions?
I never competed in bodybuilding. I was competing in powerlifting because those three exercises was the basic of my weight training. Powerlifting includes, as you know, squat, bench press, and deadlift. And that was my basic stuff. I lifted about 50 tons a week. I was really focused on being the biggest, the baddest, and the strongest. Bodybuilding got my interest based on magazines from the United States. I lived in Denmark. And, of course, Arnold was on the covers and stuff like that. So he became an inspiration. So around in 77 or so, when I invited Arnold to come to Denmark for the premiere Pumping Iron, we started the next year the Danish Bodybuilding Federation, which I ran from 1979, 80, and 81. So I was, and also then I became an international judge in bodybuilding. I was judging Mr. Olympia, Mr. Universe, Miss Universe, and the first Miss Olympia, Rachel McLeese won. Busy traveling the world, so my heart had all those years, belonged to bodybuilding, but that was not my agenda. My agenda was the strength.
How did you end up getting into movies?
That was based on when I had my 40th birthday in Denmark, having built up 3 sports federations. I was a champion in martial arts, Shotokan karate. I was one of the strongest men in the world. I decided to come to America. So 6 months later, after my 40th birthday in 84, I came here in 85. And the only person I knew was Arnold, because as I told you, years earlier, I invited him to Denmark and we created some kind of a friendship. So I called him up and said, I'm in town. I had no plans. I actually came here to retire because I had been in the gym business and martial art business and powerlifting business, for so many years, over 25 years in Denmark. He said, I'm shooting Commando in Griffith Park. Come and say hi. So when I came up there in Griffith Park, the producer, Joel Silver, was so impressed by my size because I just came from Denmark, where I became the strongest man in the world in bench press as a 40 years old, lifting 530 pounds. And I was, a monster. He said, would you like to work in the movies? Because you just had to be a member of Screen Actors Guild and have a social security number. So in 80, 81, and 82, I had worked with Arnold on the 3 Conan pictures, Conan the Barbarian in Spain, Conan the Destroyer in Mexico, and then Red Sonja in Italy. So I became a member of SAG. And when I wrote a book called Strong Man in Hollywood a couple 4 or 5 years ago, I realized that in 25 years here, I had worked on 150 movie and TV productions. So it was a coincidence I ended up in the movie business. It was nothing I had planned. I just came here to pay lesser taxes, enjoy the weather, and just having a good time. So kind of semi-retired. So only based on that phone call and meeting Joel Silver, I ended up in the movie business. That was not something I ever had thought about.
Before you did Conan, did you work on a movie called Mind Your Back, Professor?
Yeah, I did some small stuff in Denmark, and that was one of them, yeah. But that was more based on my size. I was high because I was a monster, and I was just there and stuff. But it didn't really appeal to me. Even though when I did the first Conan pictures in 1980-81, I was impressed by the enormity of a big movie production, the camaraderie, all the fun, being on a horseback, falling off a horse and sword fights and stuff. So I said to her, wait a minute, this is fun. But when I came here, that was not my intention. It just happened like that.
What was your experience on Conan like?
That was an experience based on There was 10 American stuntmen, there was 10 Spanish stuntmen, and then John Milius asked me to bring 10 big guys down from Denmark, and we were called the Animals, because we were all monsters. But the experience was that, for example, we had lunch, we had printed menus, we have waiters in white coats and gloves, and they served red wine and white wine, and we had 3 meal courses, we had, dessert, cheese and fruit and stuff. So I said to myself, wait a minute, well, I mean, this is fun. And then, of course, being active all day long, being physical, and so it was like, I was there, it was not a movie, it was just fun, 30 guys having fun.
What was it like working with John Milius?
John Milius, I had met earlier. I was in Los Angeles for the World Championship in martial art in Long Beach, and Arnold said to me, let's go and visit John Milius because he's writing a picture for me. So I met John Milius, and the picture was Conan the Barbarian. And when he saw me as a monster, he said, wait a minute, give me a good name for a big guy, a big Viking guy. I said, what about Thorsen? Oh, that's a great name. And a year later, John called me and said, hey, Sven, I want you to be in Conan the Barbarian, play Thorsen. Bring 10 of your friends. You guys can work here in Spain for 5-6 months.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, John is really a colorful, fantastic person. He's the best storyteller. I remember in Spain that every night he was telling stories from his movies, working with Sean Connery and all those big people. And he's just a big boy. I remember one day we were sitting in John's trailer, me and Arnold and John was playing with model airplanes. And the second unit director came in and said, hey, Mr. Milius, we're ready to shoot the shot. And John said, can you see I'm busy? Shoot the shit. I'm busy. So he's like a big boy, He's a fun guy to be around.
And you get to work with James Earl Jones quite a bit on that movie, right?
Oh, yeah, that was a fantastic thing. I never knew anybody, from the movie business. So working with Ben Davison was an experience. In particular, James Earl Jones, a gentleman, great voice, fantastic actor. Later on, I learned about his work and stuff. And one thing that impressed me was that on CNN, that's his voice. It's a CNN. He had such a voice. So he was really a fantastic person to meet.
Did you just kind of naturally go into the sequel, even though your character was dead from the first one?
Yeah, I mean, that was based on, I became friends with Arnold, and he pushed for me a little bit, so that helped. Even though Richard Fleischer, he didn't want to have me in the picture because I had been in the first picture. So I grew a beard, and they put a helmet on me, so that helped a little bit. Actually, the sword fight me and Arnold have in that movie is one of the most spectacular sword fights of all time. And I was also lucky to have a fantastic horse. I didn't know horses, so before I went to Spain, I took some lessons. But I was scared shitless because when you sit on a horse, that's a long way down to the ground. But I became quite good at riding horses. So my horse was so fantastic. So when I pulled it a little bit, it could stand on the back legs. And I remember a scene where the whole team from Los Angeles was down, all the big producers, Peter De Laurentiis. So I want to show off. So I had my uniform on. I was ready to do my scene. So I went right in front of them, and I tried to lift my horse up. But then the saddle got loose, and I fell on my ass with the horse on top of me. I was so embarrassed, but, that's what happens.
And then with Red Sonja, you're credited for doing some stunt work, too. Is that right?
Yeah, I did some. I had a character in there. I've not seen much, but I was there for 4 months.
And what do you like better, the acting, the stunts? I mean, you've done so many things. You've even been a producer.
Yeah, I've been very active. I like the physical aspect, the preparation. For example, for Conan, we spent a whole month in Madrid, having sword fight lessons from Yamagata, the stunt coordinator and sword coordinator. And based on my martial art background, I became an expert with weapons. I remember in Conan the Barbarian, we were in Segovia waiting for snow. So 30 stuntmen was hanging around, and they were all trying to, there was a big tree standing in the middle of the area. They were using all their weapons trying to, have it stick in the big tree. So after lunch, I was a little tipsy, so I called them all together and said, listen, guys, let me show you what a Viking can do. So I've seen them now try to, use their weapons to hit the tree. So I took a two-handed axe, took a few steps. It was about 30 yards away. And I sent the axe away, and it was like, boom, 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 and it hit the fucking oak tree. So the ground was shaking. So they were all like, wait a minute. It was fantastic. And I was so surprised myself. So they said to me, do it again. I said, fuck you. I only do it once. So from that day on, I got so much respect from the other stunt people, you know, because when you're a big guy, they think you can't move and stuff. But I can move. And I became quite skilled with weapons.
What have been some of your favorite roles to play over the years?
Conan the Barbarian. Based on the enormity, I was 7 months in Spain. It was like 7 months vacation, playing robbers, cowboys, and Indians during the day, having fun. We have 17 different locations in Spain. It was fantastic. But then the job where I really had to use all my physical skills was Gladiator. I have heard about the movie. I have sent all my reels to all over the world, try to get a job. One day I get a call from Branko Lustig, one of the producers. He also produced Schindler's List. Branko Lustig is his name. And he said, hey, we want you. Come down here. We need you. They had actually hired Lou Ferrigno. You know Lou Ferrigno. They hired him 3 months earlier, so they fired him. So with 2 days' notice, I had to go to Malta, and I was giving a 30 pages screenplay with all my moves, all the camera angles. So I was like, wait a minute, this is a big job. So I practiced the job for 4 weeks, and we shot it in 3 weeks. I spent 7 weeks there. So that job was really, later on I won 2 stunt Oscars, 2 Towers Awards for my job, best work with animals and best fight. So those 2 movies make a big impression on me. It was the most pleasant movie to work on.
You mentioned your autobiography, Strongman in Hollywood. Is that ever going to come out in English?
I have it, my wife, who's now my manager also, I have a translation of the book, and we are working on to have it to come out here. And also, when I wrote that book, it was based on pressure from the publisher. I didn't know I had a story to tell, but then I worked on it for 2 years. I got a co-writer who was fantastic, did a lot of research, and it was really a good thing for me to do, because we all have stuff in our life we're doing, we forget we have been doing, or we have made some regrets or whatever. So after I delivered the book, it was like I took 2 tons off my shoulders, because there was a lot of stuff I'd been carrying all those years, based on I was told as a kid from my parents, from my teachers in school, that I was a piece of shit, I would never be anything, etc., etc. So that was really a good thing for me to do the book. And also became a bestseller in Denmark. I got 5 stars from the critics, and they asked me to write another book, but I haven't thought about that.
What kind of stuff are you doing with Artistic Group?
No, we have a management group here. I'm sure you have seen our websites, where we are representing artists in general, musicians, actors, etc., and so I'm a part of that.
Can you tell me a little bit about Jackie O?
Jackie O is based on I got a partner some years ago. His name is Dennis Hagen. He wrote Bronco Billy, amongst other screenplays, the picture with Clint Eastwood. So we got a friendship, and we produced about 30 screenplays, and that's one of the screenplays. It's supposed to be a true Hollywood story told to Dennis on his way to Vegas, where he stranded his car on a little motel down there, a rainy day, and there was a guest sitting in the bar who told that story.
I've heard that you're a big fan of cigars.
Yeah, that was based on John Milius was smoking cigars. So I asked him one day, I like to smoke cigars. Which one should I start smoking? He said, let me tell you a story. He said, I did a movie called The Wind and the Lion with Sean Connery, and John Huston was in the picture also. He played a senator, if you remember that movie. And he said, I was in the same situation as you now. I was a young director. I was supposed to direct, Sean Connery, Candice Bergen, and John Huston. So the day before I was supposed to direct John Huston, I went to his room, and John Huston was lying on his knee, sorting cigars out on his bed. And John, trying to start a conversation, said, I like to smoke cigars. Which one should I smoke? So John Huston said to him, young man, listen to me. Come here, sit down. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I was in Paris. I was in my room. I was watching TV. I put all my money on a certain horse race. I had a girl on her knees between my legs. And when my horse won, I took a puff of my Monte Cristo number 2, and I came in her mouth. That's why, John, you should smoke Monte Cristo number 2. So that became my favorite cigar. And that all happened in Spain there, smoking Cuban cigars.
Warrior without fear, he's more powerful than any man. His legend spreads across the land and sea. Conan, the mightiest warrior ever. His quest to undo the spell of living stone cast upon his family by driving the evil serpent men back into another dimension and vanquishing their leader, the cruel wizard Raphamon. And a bravery with his magic sword protecting the mightiest of warriors indeed.
All right, thanks to Mr. Thorsen for taking the time to talk to us. I'm hoping we can get him back on the show one of these days because he's got some amazing stories. So,
are you going to do one on Abraxas?
That would be awesome. Only if I could get Jesse Ventura, who we tried to get for our JFK themed episode, but unfortunately never got a response on that one because I thought he could really kind of lay some knowledge on us about what really happened that day in Dealey Plaza.
Well, I really hope you do get to talk with Sven more because he has become one of my favorite guys to look for in action movies. And anytime I see him pop up, it's always the same. It's me going, Sven! Because there was a run that it seemed like every single movie Arnold Schwarzenegger did, Sven would have a role. It would be small, but Sven would be there. And outside of Arnie, he's one of the few guys that had shown up in all of the Conan movies, including Red Sonja.
Yeah, you got to look for him, though. He's not necessarily as present as you would like him to be in these films.
Nope. Though in Kull the Conqueror, he did have a rather prevalent role as the king that Kull supplants.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Must be the steroids.
Let's go ahead. I'm going to play the rest of the interview with Roy Thomas before we get into the sequels because he kind of lays out some of the stuff that happened with Conan the Destroyer.
I read the script, the first draft of the Conan 2 script that you and Mr. Conway wrote, so completely different from what ended up on screen and so well done. It just had me at the edge of my seat as I was reading it.
Yeah, it had its faults, but it was a script on the basis of which we got 2 or 3 more movies in the next year or so. And over again, when people read this as the movie came out and everything, people asked us, they liked this script, and they said, why did they make that other movie with it? Why were they making this other movie out of it instead of something close to the script we wrote? And we said, well, you'd have to. That happened whenever Ed Pressman sold his rights for the second movie, basically, while we were writing the screenplays, the several drafts. Each one, I think, maybe getting a little further from what we really wanted to do because Dino had no knowledge whatever of Conan and didn't want to learn anything about him. He just wanted to do his own movie. Dino had a great ability to know what kind of pop art properties to get hold of. Stephen King's Firestarter, King Kong, Flash Gordon, Conan. But then he had no concept of what to do with them, and none of the movies made from any of those were particularly outstanding. And I think the thing was Dino'd to death. The first draft was prepared entirely under Ed Pressman. We were proud of that, and that's the only one we ever would show to anybody as a sample of our work because we felt it was superior to our later drafts, and it was, and of course superior to the final movie draft. Although they did add a couple of one or two nice things to the movie. I'll give them the credit. Director Richard Fleischer came on just at the end of our tenure. In fact, he's probably the one who got us kicked off. And then Stanley Mann, whom we never met, who wrote the several last drafts. They wrote a really nice scene for how to introduce Zula, who was our character, but they wrote a nice introduction scene to her. And they added the motivation of Conan trying to bring Valeria from the first movie back to life. But that was added because I told Richard Fleischer that was something that I had wanted to do in the movie, that Gerry and I had wanted to do in the movie, because it was based on something in an actual Robert E. Howard story. And I gave him a copy of I think it was Conan number 110 or 115, the last color comic I did in that series, which utilized some of that same plot. And so Fleischer liked the idea of Conan trying to bring back his dead girlfriend. However, he kicked us off the movie and had somebody else write it, and I didn't even get the comic book back that I loaned him. But then I've never loaned anything to a movie producer or director that I ever got back.
You said that the script helped get you a couple gigs after that. What were some of the things that it led to?
There was a movie script we wrote for, I can't remember the studio right now. Which major studio was it? 20th maybe? That was called Haven was one of its names. It was basically like the Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurai in a more science fiction setting. Let's see, there were one or two others, and of course there were other things that were in the works that didn't quite eventually come to fruition. But we were getting a lot of work and a lot of meetings and so forth on the basis of that script because people liked it. It's not like people said it was a work of art or anything, but they thought it was a good solid script. And as they were seeing other versions of the scripts going around, they thought, as I do, that basically our first draft was superior to what came later, either by us or by anybody else, except for the one or two scenes maybe.
And you, a few years later, turned what you did with the screenplay into a comic book, correct?
Yeah, Gerry Conway had the idea to do that while I wasn't working for Marvel, right before my contract at DC was up, and he was about to work on it because with my blessing. And then when I was no longer under contract at DC, I came in and said I'd really like to write it with him. So we ended up co-writing it. I think he wrote the first half and I wrote the second half, or I believe that's it. We never worked together on it. It was just that one of us wrote the first half and then the other one took over and wrote the other half.
I'm curious, did you see the Conan reboot that they did a few years ago?
Yes.
What did you think of that?
Well, I thought the actor was okay, although, of course, it's hard to compete with Arnold in that thing. There was just something so larger than life about Arnold. But I just felt, once again, they didn't have the story right. For one thing, it seems to me like they took like 45 minutes or so with him as a child. They extended that origin. Just why do the origin over in the first place? The only thing to me that worked well is I think there were these sand creatures or sand demons he fought. And that was the kind of fight that, that I think Robert E. Howard would have come up with some kind of creature like that. And it was pretty much the only good thing about the movie. I wanted to see it be good. For one thing, if that movie had been a success, there probably would have been a Red Sonja movie, and I own a little piece of Red Sonja, so I would have benefited, financially, and I would have liked to seen a second and even better Red Sonja movie come out. But unfortunately, the problems with the third Conan movie made that impossible. But I just thought it was wrong-headed, all the way from calling it Conan the Barbarian, reusing the title, to redoing his origin, and at such incredible, noxious length. And then, he just, that actor somehow, he did all right, but he just never seemed, they never let him seem like the larger-than-life character that Arnold Schwarzenegger was. I think he could have come close to it if they'd had a better script. But the whole script, I mean, with all the failings our scripts may have had, or Stanley, or Milius's might have had for the first one, I think that the third movie, had them all beat as far as missing the point.
I think a lot of people realize, going back to Red Sonja, that she was kind of a Robert E. Howard creation, but kind of a your creation as well.
Yeah, it was sort of half and half. I like the idea of taking the character from Howard and putting her in there. It made it seem more like it was, part of Robert E. Howard. If it wasn't part of the Conan mythos, at least it was part of the Robert E. Howard mythos. And so I kind of like that. I was looking for a character that would be a woman to encounter Conan, and I became aware of that story, and the one story in which she appears, with her name spelled differently, and of course set at a different era and not with Conan. And at that point, it was just easy to take that story and turn it into a Conan story. It worked flawlessly, and I've never had any reason to think that was anything but a nice idea. I sort of lucked into it, but it was a nice idea.
I have to ask, what did you think of the movie?
Well, not that much. We again, it was Dino to death. Dino took over the property. My partner Gerry Conway and I were offered a chance at writing it after at a certain stage, but our agent wouldn't let us do it because there was no back end money, and It didn't make any difference. It wouldn't have been any good no matter who wrote it. It wasn't allowed to be good. What the worst mistake made was they wanted to bring Conan in for just a little cameo. My understanding is that L. Sprague de Camp insisted that if Conan appeared even for 5 minutes, he had to be paid, the whole amount of money as if Conan was in the whole movie. And that wasn't going to work out because Dino, worked on always keeping his budgets down as much as he could. So they just ended up having Arnold play a character who was not named Conan, but who obviously was Conan and everything except his name. Then he could be in the movie as much as they wanted, and he was in the movie so much that he steered it away from being a Red Sonja movie at all. It became more like a Conan and Red Sonja movie than it was a Red Sonja movie, and not a particularly good one at that.
Yeah, I've seen posters from Germany where it's just Arnold super huge and then Red Sonja just tiny. Yeah. They named the movie after his character.
Yeah, no, it was warped. It was warped by that. It was wrong-headed. It was just Dino getting a good property and not knowing what the hell to do with it. He did this over and over again with popular things. I mean, his King Kong, his Firestarter I haven't seen, but I understand that was not one. It obviously wasn't one of the better Stephen King movies. Flash Gordon was not very good. I saw that one, and that wasn't right. The best thing about the first Conan movie with Schwarzenegger was that Dino wasn't very involved in it, which is why I think it was as good as it was.
What are you working on these days?
Well, I do my magazine, my comics history magazine, Alter Ego. I work with Stan Lee on the Spider-Man newspaper strip. I write a couple of, about 3 strips really, for Edgar Rice Burroughs online site, which is fun. I've just put out this book you may have seen that came out right before Christmas, this $200 book, 75 Years of Marvel, from the German publisher Thorsen. And I'm working on a book now about Stan for them, which will also be a large, humongous, and very art-laden book.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, those Thorsen books look so good.
Yeah, they're nice. So we had to rush that one out because I wasn't supposed to write but half of it, and I ended up writing all of it. But I'm glad that I did end up writing all of it and everything. And now I can get back to the Stan Lee book.
You famously helped create characters such as Ultron and Vision. What is it like now, all these years later, to see them kind of coming out in these Marvel movie forms? What are you thinking of the Marvel movies?
I like them, most of them. I've seen almost all of them, and I've liked almost all of them in varying degrees. The X-Men movies just sometimes got a little convoluted for my taste, but I really like them. The recent spate of movies that the Marvel Studios have been making, starting with the Iron Man and then culminating in the Avengers, has, I think, really been outstanding, and it shows a real mastery of how to put these things together. They sort of, I guess, they reverse engineered what Stan Lee was doing over those years by tying together all the various comics he was writing with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and so forth. And they decided, well, if you can do that in comics, why can't you do it in movies? It must have been something of an amazement for a lot of people who are seeing individual movies like Iron Man and Captain America and Thor and the Hulk movies, and then suddenly to find out that the 4 of them were going to be in a movie together, because that kind of thing is something pretty close to without precedent in movies. I mean, there are very few cases where you can find that 2 or 3 or 4 movie franchises, and that's what they were. Each was a separate movie franchise, just like Spider-Man or X-Men or Fantastic Four or Daredevil that have been made separately. And to suddenly take those several franchises and put them together, because, of course, the general public didn't really know anything about the Avengers. They didn't know those guys all had been part of the Avengers at one time, and that there was a precedent for having them in a comic together and therefore in a movie together. It was just luck that, in a certain sense, that all the properties that Marvel held on to, as opposed to the ones that had been already licensed to others, like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and X-Men, that all the ones that Marvel held on to, of those early ones, led themselves to, being members of the Avengers. You didn't have to bring in characters who hadn't been part of the Avengers, because everybody in that movie had actually been an Avenger. It was just a natural to say, hey, let's do the movie equivalent of the comics. And, of course, I think it's fascinating because, it's always amazing. It's not that the movies are the ultimate form of characters like Ultron and the Vision and for that matter, Thor, Iron Man. The ultimate form of those characters, in my mind, is the comic books themselves. the ones done by Stan and Jack and Steve originally, and later the ones done by me and John Buscema and other people. While I don't consider us as having been really just some opening act for the movies, I do think that it's wonderful to see them expanded into this, even more popular art form, and to see them be so successful, and without any changes they make, still to be so well done. I'm especially pleased to see that the Vision, and from what little I can see of them, and certainly Ultron, seem to be so true to the roots. Ultron even looks like the some of the characters look more or look less like the Marvel versions, but Ultron looks pretty much like the first Marvel version of him. I suppose in some ways I'd have rather seen a slightly less humanoid body like the second one I made up near the end that Sal Buscema and I designed. But, the original Ultron was that looked like a big, bulky guy and that evil smiling face, and that's what they've done, and I think it's great.
Yeah, it must be nice to see these creations of yours kind of come back, and what I'm really hoping is that it helps push people back into the comics to see what these origins are and to see the stories kind of evolve that way. I'm hoping that it's not just a one-way street.
Marvel will, put some of those stories in print. I guess some of these things have come back into print in the last little bit, and probably more are going to be coming out in the next few months. I wish they had done a book that would have put together the relative handful of Ultron stories I wrote, but I didn't even think to suggest it to them. And they did, I did about a total of 5 of them back in the original incarnation, and then 2 stories with, the first one had 2 issues, and then the second one had 3. And then in the 90s, I did about 4 or 5 more issues with Ultron in the Avengers West Coast book. It would have been nice to see those collected. That would have been a nice book. But, these things will come into print one way or the other, and the Vision, too, is in those stories, so it'll be nice to see them. It's kind of funny now of seeing the Hulk counted as being as being integral to the Avengers when he was actually only in the first few issues, and then he was gone, and never to come back for decades. And we didn't get Ant-Man in there quite, but maybe he'll get in later, backward instead of forward. And the whole idea that, Iron Man rather than Hank Pym has to have created Ultron now, well, if Hank Pym isn't around, I guess, Iron Man makes a lot of sense. And what little I know and what little they've given out of the story certainly seems to me like a very sensible and almost inspired way to go to keep it reasonably faithful to the comics within the context of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as they term it.
All right, so Conan the Destroyer. Read the script for this one, and if Roy Thomas's Vision had gotten onto screen, really, you can't ask for somebody more versed in Conan lore at this particular point in time than Roy Thomas. I mean, and he's writing the script. The first draft script was January of 1983, so it's right after Conan the Barbarian has been released. They are right on the sequel. Okay, let's get this.
Because we forgot to mention, this movie was a fucking monster hit.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, theaters.
Yeah. No, we wouldn't have got the films that we've mentioned so far, like Sword the Sorcerer and, Yor, the Hunter from the Future, all these kind of things. We wouldn't have got that had Conan the Barbarian tanked. This was a huge hit. This is what really put Arnold on the map. I mean, he was great in Pumping Iron and Stay Hungry and all these kind of things. He was amazing as the third baddie from the left when it came to The Long Goodbye, but he's not making his bones with those things. He's there for Conan. Monster hit. This thing really did great box office, and they were geared up and ready for that sequel, man. And they got this guy on here, and very strong Conan script, and a lot of the elements made it into Conan the Destroyer as far as like Black warrior woman, a horn of a god that is going to bring him back and try to conquer the world, a protector of this younger virginal princess that has to go and find the horn. All these kind of things are there, but talk about watered down. You know, we mentioned that as far as the score goes. Everything that I just talked about is still there in Conan the Destroyer, but it is so perverted and just so gone. I mean, Conan the Destroyer basically feels like what the sword and sorcery, like the third or fourth tier films that came out after Conan the Barbarian, this feels like it belongs with those guys down in the gutter. I mean, this thing, it just does not work for me. And I know some people love it and they grew up with this film and there's this nostalgia factor and everything. And I can understand that. And there's a couple moments here and there. It's just not good. You know, I love Tracy Walter and he's no Subutai though. I'm sorry. In the beginning, it was kind of weird. The beginning of the Conan the Destroyer script has Subutai basically being killed off. So, you know, Valeria's gone. Mako, for some reason, nowhere to be found. Subutai's there. He gets hung right away in the original script. Then that's it. You know, like, so Conan is free. He doesn't have the Tracy Walter kind of side piece, you know. And, yeah, I mean, Grace Jones, her character, the way it was written, would have been fantastic. Wilt Chamberlain would have been a albino. An albino eunuch, because you really don't want Wilt Chamberlain protecting the virginal princess.
No, you
I'm
really
just saying.
don't.
That's kind of an in-joke right there. But yeah, Grace Jones, I don't mind her as an actress. She's been very good. She annoyed the piss out of me in this movie. Every time her character appeared on screen, I went, oh my God, just kill her already.
I don't know. To me, it had reached a point that it was just so over the top. The one way I can engage with this film is as a piece of camp, as a piece of kitsch. Now, there are some scenes where it just doesn't work, and as much as I like Tracy Walter, I think his contributions to this film definitely ruin a lot of the tone for me. But when you have a character like Grace Jones's that is just so exaggerated and so over the top, perhaps it's a cinematic self-defense mechanism, but I find enjoyment in it by just how terrible it is.
All right, I'm gonna say this. I'm probably gonna lose a lot of credibility. Rob Schneider was less distracting as comic relief in Judge Dredd.
Whoa, wow. I would put them on the same level, but I wouldn't necessarily say that Rob Schneider is better than anyone.
Because the comic relief in this Conan the Destroyer seemed like it was trying more to be funny than it was to be adventurous. And that, I mean, even Sarah Douglas, the costume they give her is so, look at my cleavage, look at my cleavage, look at my cleavage, that it almost comes across like a parody of what Conan was supposed to be. That's what I find so goddamn insulting about this one.
And again, I think some of it might be attributable to the fact that they got Richard Fleischer to direct this. And you look back on his filmography, the closest thing to Conan he did was The Vikings, but a lot more of his other movies were stuff like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or The Fantastic Voyage or, Dr. Dolittle. So I don't necessarily think he was the greatest pick for this. But then again, he was such a jobbing director. He did so many disparate films that it's hard to even peg a style for him, because at the same time where he did all those adventure movies and lighthearted movies, he also did stuff like Soylent Green or Tora Tora Tora. So it's hard to get a really good bead on Richard Fleischer sometimes. But I have to feel that his sensibilities were way different than Milius.
Yeah, but this whole movie is shot so flatly. It's shot like it's a TV movie. It's shot so flat and uninspired. And you've got some really inspired set pieces like the Mirror Demon that is totally ruined by the horrendous special effects. I mean, you can see the guy is wearing a Halloween mask. You can see where the mask stops when his shirt moves, and you can see the actor's white skin, his Caucasian skin under it. And I'm like, really? That undercuts how awesome the concept of the scene is. It's terrible looking. But then you've got the awesome visuals of like that smoke dragon that carries the princess away. You go, that looks so amazing. And then the mirror guy, you go, oh my God, did you go to a Spencer Gifts for this? Is that how low the budget was?
And especially since you had cast Pat Roach, that I have a gentleman I have a great deal of affection for, as, you know, this evil wizard, and then you have the climax be that horrible special effect. I mean, at one point he picks up Arnie and does a giant swing with him, which it's fine when you see it in a wrestling ring, but you don't necessarily want to see it in a Conan movie.
And we get that same camera movement that we just saw in Saturday Night Fever a couple weeks ago, where you see Arnold zooming around the room. It's just like, really? Am I watching this right now? Is that where we're going with this?
And was I the only person that during that mirror sequence had flashbacks to Enter the Dragon and half expected to hear that horribly dubbed sensei say, the enemy only has illusions and images to hide behind?
Actually, I will say one thing about that whole sequence that is well directed. And I was looking. You can't see the cameraman reflected once. So they did a good job of actually, because you're in a room surrounded, you know, in a complete circle with mirrors. You had to hide the cameraman pretty well, I think.
I think they did a good job with that. Do the credit.
That part, you can see how fake the mask is, but you can't see the cameraman. So that's something.
Well, and I think some of that is the experience of a guy like Fleischer. That, yes, he's a very flat director, and yes, he's very workmanlike in his approach, but at this point, you know, he had been working in the industry since the 50s, so the guy definitely knew his craft. It's just, in comparison to some of the newer energy that Milius was bringing up, you know, it's new Hollywood versus old Hollywood, and we see the effects. And part of me wonders, is this the movie that De Laurentiis wanted the first Conan to be? Because it definitely feels more of a piece with a lot of other De Laurentiis produced stuff.
If you take out Manhunter, almost everything DEG made feels more like in line with Conan the Destroyer. Manhunter's the only arguably really serious film from DEG that kind of makes you go, wow, Dino, really?
I can't put it in the same category as Flash Gordon because I think that Conan the Destroyer is sillier than Flash Gordon.
And that's saying a lot, especially when you have
Lorenzo Semple Jr. writing Flash Gordon.
Or the Hawkmen.
Die! But just like what they had initially wanted, this one to be more family friendly and more open to the public didn't think so. This film was a major disaster at the box office.
But much like Beastmaster, had a long, long run on television.
Her courage was forged out of fire. Her power, a gift of the gods. Her destiny, to become a glorious new hero. Red Sonja. Only one man on Earth is man enough to win her.
Don't be a fool.
Try it.
To love her. To join her great adventure. Arnold Schwarzenegger is Lord Kalidor.
Kill them.
Two legends unite to destroy the Earth's greatest evil.
God, Majesty, what you want? The world, Eichel!
We must find a way in. Your Highness learns fast.
I make it a rule never to take a woman unless she can beat me in a fair fight.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Why not?
Brigitte Nielsen. A warrior. A woman. A magnificent new legend.
Well, let's get to my favorite of the Conan sequels, which was not a Conan movie. It was Red Sonja coming out the next year. We got the same director. We've got Arnold back as Kalidor, not Conan. Sandal Bergman coming back as the Sarah Douglas character, basically.
As Queen Evil Lesbian.
Yes. Oh, God. Yeah, there's so much lesbianism
there's so much
in this
gay
film.
terror. It's the fact that she's evil because she's a lesbian. That's basically her character.
And then the Beast Raban, Paul L. Smith as Falcon, who is protecting Ernie Reyes Jr. as the insufferable Prince
God, I wanted
Tarn.
to step on that kid so bad.
Is it just me, or does that kid look weirdly proportioned? I mean, I know he's a small child, but he almost looked like he took a small child and slightly squished him.
Well, the outfits don't help either. Like the way that they have that thing that goes over his legs at times. And then Bridget Nielsen, oh my God. I remembered Bridget Nielsen as like the hot blonde from Beverly Hills Cop 2. I forgot just how awful she is as Red Sonja. You got to look far for bad acting this bad. I mean, by this point, Conan being kind of Arnold's, first major film, by this point, 3 years later, Arnold's like winning Oscars compared to this lady. This is insane how badly she delivers her dialogue. It is just... Oh, it hurts to watch.
But again, though, just much like Conan the Destroyer, it might be my cinematic self-defense, but there are so many scenes where the awfulness of the film, particularly the dialogue scenes between Brigitte Nielsen and Arnold Schwarzenegger, where you just have to laugh at it, and it becomes enjoyable in its own right just by how terrible it is.
Okay, think about it like this. The dialogue scenes are that bad, and those are the takes they used.
You must learn to like men a little better. They are not all evil.
We must judge by our own experience, Grandmaster.
I know. But in life, all is not swordplay. Hatred of men in a lovely young woman. It could be our downfall.
I don't hate all men, Grandmaster.
We did 20 takes, and that was the best one.
But Mike, I sent you that review that comic writer Peter David gave of Red Sonja. Before I read that, I'd never quite put that together. But he's right about why this movie feels so almost hate-filled and wrong, isn't it? About how she was raped, so unless a man can conquer her, no man can have her. So you kind of have to re-rape her to break her. That's a sick-ass message.
You won't find happiness unless you learn to love men. That's essentially the plot.
Well, and I know there had to have been more of the beginning. Just the way that this movie starts is just so abrupt with the way that, like, her family's dead within seconds, and I know there had to have been more there, but it just feels like it was all on the cutting room floor or something. It's just like, what happened here? Was that too violent? Because again, it feels like Red Sonja, fun for the whole family. Look, we have Ernie Reyes Jr. in here. This is a kid that we can all relate to. He's kind of like Short Round, right? He was popular.
Well, yeah, and you got Pat Roach from the Indiana Jones movies, so that has another connection.
Bring in the kids. It was safe enough for me to go see over at the Southland 4.
And it's a movie about rape.
When I saw this movie when I was 6 or 7,
rape and lesbianism.
I didn't understand a lot of the stuff that was going on in this movie. And yet I admit, as a little kid, I liked this film. Going to it as an adult, albeit a emotionally stunted adult like I am, yeah, it's not so good. There's enjoyment to be found from a strictly kitsch perspective. But if you compare it to Conan the Barbarian, oh, it's painful.
And the audiences said the same thing, because this was also a fucking bomb.
Yeah, we wouldn't get another Conan film for quite a few years, and it's kind of weird. The next Conan film we got was actually a Kull film. There was a script written by Charles Edward Pogue. The draft I have is June 5th, 1992, and basically they just did a find and replace, and that ended up becoming Kull the Conqueror with our good friends Kevin Sorbo as Kull.
This was also a disaster as well, both on film and financial. You're noticing a theme here. Everything after the original didn't strike a chord. But then with Kull, after that, you did get 2 moderately successful Conan properties, but they weren't movies. You had the Conan the Adventurer cartoon, which lasted for a full season of 65 episodes, and it might have lasted 2 seasons, which was actually a surprisingly good kids cartoon, surprisingly violent for a cartoon. And then you had the Ralph Mueller 1997, I think, the live action TV series that just kind of got lost in. It was written off as a Hercules: The Legendary Journeys ripoff, ironically enough, because of the Kevin Sorbo thing. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good. It was.
Yeah, that's the best thing you could say about it. I mean, take nothing away from Ralph Mueller. You put him in the right role, and he can excel. But he really wasn't bringing much to the table as Conan. But he wasn't terrible, and the show itself was not terrible. It just was. It was.
It was better than Beastmaster, the series.
Yes, I will give it that.
The biggest problem with Conan, the TV show, was its budget. They shot over in Eastern Europe to get some of the locales that they needed, and probably for tax reasons. But the effects were terrible. There was that late 90s TV CG. There was one scene where he's fighting a spider that looks so fake, a giant spider. This movie, the stories and characters were cliched, but they weren't bad. What drugged the show down was that their aspirations were larger than their budget. This film needed, instead of being $1 million an episode, they required $2 million an episode to make this decent. That was part of the problem of the Conan TV show.
And it wouldn't be until 2011 that we would finally get another Conan film. Before we get into that, let's take another break here, and we'll play an interview with Sean Hood, who is one of the screenwriters for the 2011 Conan the Barbarian.
Some of your early credits have you as a swing gang. Can you explain to my listeners what a swing gang is?
Well, in the art department, there's a whole gang of guys usually, although there's some female members as well, who basically dress the set. In other words, the walls are built, the structure is built, but then it has to be filled with objects, whether it be furniture, chandeliers, dungeon torture equipment or whatever. So what set dressers do is they run around town in a truck to different prop houses and stores or whatever. You buy up all the stuff that's going to go into the set and you bring it and then you set it all up. And then when they're done shooting, you pull it all down. There's also something called an on-set dresser, which is like a prop person. And it's all part of the also very closely related to the props department, where you just are on set and moving things around the camera depending on the shot. So the set dresser, if the set is like a person, the set dresser is the costumer for the set.
I read that you have a double major in mathematics and studio art. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I always tell people that what I really majored in was everything that had no possible application to the real world. Because in mathematics, I was just interested in mostly multidimensional geometry and other pure mathematics that really had no particular application. And in art, I was a painter of mostly abstract paintings, which also didn't have any particular relationship to the real world. And the other things that I liked to study in college were philosophy and some literature, all the stuff that they list as the majors that will not get you a job when you get out of school. So I did the only thing I could think of when I got out, which was get into the film business.
How did you go from being a set dresser, member of the swing gang, all this, into writing films?
Well, one thing that's interesting about set dressers and prop guys and some of the other sort of grunts like grips and electricians, and they're a really interesting group of people because a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are people who are younger, and remember this was in my early 20s, who have aspirations for bigger things. As a set dresser, I first got into set dressing because I thought I might want to be a production designer and move my way up to the art department. But as I started set dressing, I met these aspiring actors, these aspiring filmmakers, these aspiring writers. And as a result, very quickly, I got involved in independent film and in independent film groups in which we would all come together. We had no money, but we would all come together and we'd collaborate on making films, usually shooting on anything we could find, Super 8, High 8, sometimes 16 millimeter. And after a couple of years of doing that, I saved my money. I worked on, as a set dresser, I worked on some big Arnold Schwarzenegger movies like True Lies and Last Action Hero. And I was young, so I didn't have a lot to spend my money on. So I saved it all up. And I knew from working with these independent filmmakers that I wanted to be a writer and a director and to work on that side of things rather than art department. And I saved my money and I applied to film school, and I ended up going to USC as a production major. In that case, I was on sort of a director's track. But as I was there in school, although I was directing films, I found that I really enjoyed writing them. And until that point, I really didn't see myself as a writer at all. And then when I got out of school around 98, I had a couple of short films, and I started to get some jobs working on things like promos for NBC and other networks, writing and producing those. And then around 2000, I sold my first feature script in 2000. It was called The Dorm, and it was developed for 15 years and came out, 14 years, and finally came out as the TV movie on MTV just 4 months ago. Development can take a long time. And believe me, over 14 years, that script changed a lot.
I bet. Just technology and everything has just changed so much over the time.
Yep. And also, it went from it started out as a TV movie in 2000, but then it was going to be a feature film with Paramount for a couple of years, around 2004. Then the executives turned over, and then it was going to be, we talked about it as an alternate reality game. It was a short story. It went through a lot of different phases, and a lot of those phases it had a different cast of characters, a different primary storyline, and then it would then sometimes we'd go back to an earlier idea. It's interesting because the final film that came out was something in some ways very, very different from all the things that happened before, but in terms of a few scenes and a few particular ideas, it came precisely from the original script that I wrote, I think, the first draft of in 1999.
How did you get involved with Halloween Resurrection?
I sold that script in 2000, and I also started doing, some writing assignments for some of the movies that never came out, but they tended to be because The Dorm was a genre piece, and in the sort of that horror world, some of the other projects that I was getting were also in the horror genre, or at least in the thriller genre. So I had all these samples that were horror, and my agents at the time sort of worked in that world, and they sent a lot of my stuff over to Dimension, and I ended up getting in contact with a executive there named Louis Spiegler, who I guess liked my work, and another fellow named Jesse Berdinka, and they wanted to pull me onto something. They pulled me onto Halloween Resurrection, and what happened was I ended up getting what's called a rewrite deal with Dimension Films, which was I basically had a contract that I would rewrite, I can't remember how many, it was either 4 or 5 projects at a set rate. And so Halloween Resurrection was really the first part of that, the first one on that deal, and I ended up doing rewrites on all sorts of other projects of theirs. It was kind of almost always a case in which, like in Halloween Resurrection, where they were going to start shooting very, very soon, and they needed somebody to come in and do a pass on the screenplay before they started shooting. And then inevitably I would end up doing production rewrites, which are rewrites that are done during shooting to adjust to whatever else is going on. And that's what happened with Dimension. I also did a draft of Cursed. I did drafts of the Crow, Wicked Prayer, a lot of crazy Dimension films I don't think I would have chosen to work on, and weren't necessarily the finest films when they came out, but the experience was great because I was forced to write very quickly, write very practically, and it was a great way to get a lot of experience screenwriting, even if the end result I kind of had little control over.
With that kind of a deal, do you necessarily always get screen credit, or what's that like?
No. The way screen credit works, especially now when there are sometimes between as many 6, 8, 10 writers who have written on something. The WGA decades and decades ago decided that they wanted the writing credit to carry weight. They didn't want there to be one director and 8 credited writers. And so the way it works now is that only 2 writers or 2 writing teams can get credit. Sometimes the screenplay credit can be split in between screenplay by and story by. But in general, in one of those categories, only 2 writers or 2 writing teams can get credit. And a writing team is usually joined by an ampersand. And if it's 2 different writers who worked on the screenplay at different times, it's separated by the actual word and. And then there's, at the end of production, when they try to determine credits, either all the writers agree, or when they disagree over who should get credit, it goes into arbitration. And what's interesting is that something like most films go into credit arbitration, a period where, and I've gone through several of these arbitrations, where each of the writers has to write a statement about why they think they should get credit, outlining how much what their contribution to the final shooting script was in terms of dramatic structure, dialogue, characterization, and new and original scenes. Then a panel of 3 anonymous arbiters who are all experienced WGA writers then read all the different drafts of that were written, go all the way up to the shooting script, which can be an enormous amount of reading. Movies are often based on a book, so that panel has to read the original book and then maybe 9, 10, 11, 12 different drafts of the screenplay, with their highlighters out, and try to figure out who contributed most to the final screenplay. As you can imagine, all the different writers have the very different opinions on, what they contributed and how much weight should be given. And so what happens is, on many films that I worked on, I came in last and did a lot of rewrites right up toward to the eve of production. But in some cases, all I did was fix up address some dialogue or fix up a character. Or, I've had writing assignments where all I did was just cut the script down from a length of 140 pages to a length of 85 pages. Or, different kinds of script doctoring. And a lot of that goes uncredited. But in the case of Halloween Resurrection, and as it turns out in the case of Conan, enough changed based on my contribution for me to get credit on the final film. With Conan, I'd worked on previous projects with the producers at Millennium, in particular Joe Gatta, who at one point was, in the first years of me working as a writer, was actually my agent, and then he turned producer. I'd worked with them on previous projects. I'd written a draft of the movie Hercules, The Legend Begins, in 2007. And they eventually made that only, 2 years ago. But the original script that I wrote for them, they liked very much. And so because it was also in the sword and sandals genre, they were interested in me doing rewrites on Conan. I'd also worked with Marcus Nispel earlier on of all things, it was like an underground zombie project that never got made, but that was being developed. And I wrote a draft of that for him. So I was familiar with all the people. And, another thing that a lot of people don't realize about the process, the screenplay development, is that it's not as if one writer writes a draft and everyone dislikes something and somebody comes in and fixes it. A lot of times, most of the time actually, writers come in and have a very strong vision, write what is, from an objective point of view, a fine screenplay, but they had a particular vision. It was developed in a particular direction, and then new people come on board on the project, and they want to take the project in a different direction, and they often hire different writers to do that. This is sort of the way the development process works. But the one writer being replaced by another is not necessarily an indication that the first writer or the second or the third or all the writers who came before didn't do a stellar job. More often it means that somebody new to the project wants to go in a different direction. And that's what happened with Conan. There was an original draft that was developed with the producers over many years, written by Thomas Donnelly and Joshua Oppenheimer, and it was developed in a lot of different directions. They wrote a number of drafts that explored different things, and it was a script that was really highly regarded by the producers. But then when Lionsgate got involved and when Marcus Nispel came on board as the director, there were a lot of different ideas about where it should go. And that's what always is a dangerous place for a screenplay because, especially for writers who have been involved in a project for a long time, suddenly new people come in and they want to do kind of the opposite of what they had in mind, and then the script starts to get pulled in a bunch of different directions. And that's when the problems start. It's not suddenly you've got a bunch of different people who have maybe different visions of what the ultimate product could be, and it becomes very difficult for the writer or writers to make sense of that, and then the script can start to come apart at the seams. And that's what I think was happened with Conan. There was a writer after the credited writing team, Donnelly and Oppenheimer, who worked on the script as well, who did a good job, but he took it in a very particular direction that the director didn't agree with, and then it went in another direction. And all those sort of tidal forces working on the screenplay in different directions meant that the screenplay that they had going into very close to production was ungainly because it was a sort of a Frankenstein monster of a bunch of very different ideas of what the movie should be, even though the writers and the people who came up with all these individual ideas were talented and had good ideas. It was like the whole thing just didn't fit together. So when I got on board, my job was, more than anything else, was to try to make sense of all these different ideas and sew the script together in a way so that it felt whole and it felt like a single vision. So I'm sorry, that's how I got involved on Conan. But when I was hired, there were only 2 weeks before principal photography was about to start, and in order to get credit, you have to have, I ended up changing about 40% of the screenplay just over the course while the movie was being shot. And a lot of that was just necessary in terms of what was going on in production, what was going on in terms of what different people involved in the production wanted, and also me trying to just make sense of these different ideas, but also try to, my own particular vision of what I thought Conan should be, try to give it some sort of unity.
You were the one that had kind of final say on the screenplay. You were the guy who was doing the actual writing and rewriting while the production was going on. From
at least the final say in terms of the string of writers. In other words, the other writers were done, and then so I was the last person to have my fingers in the screenplay. But final say, really, that's an interesting question all in and of itself, because the writer is in a position in these types of films like Conan, where it's based on very particular underlying material, and when there are very prominent producers and prominent executives involved who are making an incredibly expensive movie that will determine their careers, and when there's a very strong-minded director who comes on board, all these people are going to throw their considerable weight around, and they're all heavier than the writer, in order to sort of shift the screenplay according to the direction that they want. So the writer doesn't always have final say, but yet when he or she is writing, you're also in the position of ultimately you have to take responsibility for whatever's put on the page. So it creates a lot of friction. It ends up being a lot of passionate debate about what should be put in there. The writer doesn't often win those battles in a case like Conan. But that said, you are correct in that the last writer does have ultimate responsibility for the shooting script.
And when you said that you brought in like maybe 40% changes, what kind of stuff were you bringing to the party with this?
There were a number of elements, and some of those elements had more to do with what ended up in the shooting script than necessarily what happened in what came together in the final film. But the writing that I did, the first part of the writing I did was actually pretty technical, which is just taking a script in which there were a number of pieces that didn't really fit together, and figuring out a way for those things to fit together, for character arcs to feel whole, for a story to sort of make sense as it goes from A to B to C. That turned out to be very difficult, just in a practical sense, because new ideas came along. Yet they had to be. As I was rewriting, I couldn't change. Sets had already been built, special effects had already been worked on. Whole stunts had been choreographed, in preparation. There was like 6 months of preparation coming into this. So I had to work within certain parameters. There was a lot that I couldn't change. What I tried to bring to it was I wanted to make sure that the movie had a tone that was consistent with the character as he appeared in the original pulp novels and in some of the original comic books. I also, when I came to it, I was very interested in both the villain and the female characters. I spent a lot of time writing out the characters of Tamara, the leading lady, and Marique, who was eventually played by Rose McGowan. All of that ended up being cut out of the final film. And again, that had to do with differing visions of what those characters should be. I was very, very interested in creating very complex villains. I wanted to give the villain a big backstory and a motivation for why he was doing all the bad things he was doing. I also wanted to create a dynamic female character to go along with Conan, so that she would have her own battles, her own kills, her own, again, motivations, her own reasons to be in conflict with Conan, and that sort of thing. When I was rewriting Marique, a character was originally written as for a man. I came up with this. We developed a really pretty perverse sort of subtext for this character and a very complex sort of conflict that she had with her father, that where she in many ways undermined him. And a lot of that so I brought a lot of that, and so you can see a little bit of that peeking out in the movie, but most of it was cut out so that you don't really see it. And that had to do with, I think, differing ideas with some of the producers and the director in terms of they were worried that some of that work might weaken Conan as a character. I didn't think it did, but they wanted the Conan character to be constantly front and center. They wanted to make sure that the villain wasn't, that the audience wouldn't empathize or sympathize with the villain in any way. And I had sort of different ideas about whether that was the right idea. But anyway, I brought some of that kind of character work to it. And then other parts of it were just had to do with, in any movie like this, you have to create a mythology around all the different characters and the backstory of what the things that they're pursuing, and getting that mythology straight so that it makes sense and that everyone can agree on it was another whole chore, figuring out what it is that Conan is ultimately going for, what it is that the villain is ultimately going for. There's a whole mythology surrounding a mask and a resurrection ritual that happens at the end. I was sort of brought in to try to make that all work, because that, believe me, in the earlier drafts was completely different from what ended up in the final film. And so for better or for worse, I came in to change all those things.
This whole idea of you getting there 2 weeks before shooting starts, and then you've got, at least 7 listed producers plus the director who probably all have their own opinions. This sounds just incredibly stressful.
It was, and it was a very stressful shoot. I was brought in 2 weeks before production, and after 2 weeks of writing, I was put on a plane and I went to Bulgaria. And the atmosphere in Bulgaria was one of extreme stress. And there was a lot of stress surrounding the script, because ultimately, when you start production on a movie that expensive with that many moving parts and that many different crew members, the script is your center of gravity. Your script is the blueprint that everybody is working off of. And if there's this sense that the script is going to change at any moment, or that there are whole points of the script that are going to be subject to change, this creates a lot of nervousness all the way through production. All the production heads are suddenly going, what are we doing? Are we building the set, or are we not building the set? Are we prepping this location, or are we not? Actors are saying, what is my character's motivation? What are they doing later? What is my backstory? Are you changing it? And so the writer is really at the middle of this maelstrom. I mean, all these different forces spinning around. And I was lucky in that I had a good relationship with one of the producers who acted as a little bit of a front, so that in order to get to me, they had to go sort of get through him first, which made things a little bit easier, even though, of course, I'm still dealing with all these different visions. At least I didn't have 30 people calling me every day with a different idea of what to put in the script. But Conan was one of those movies where you had a lot of people with incredibly strong ideas about what the movie should be. And those ideas ultimately were at odds with each other. So I found myself as a writer often in the position of trying to negotiate those between different people who had different visions for the script, and to try to keep everyone involved and just try to advocate for whatever I thought was the best solution. But it's not what people think of sometimes when they think of screenwriting. They think of it like a playwright. You just go away into a cabin somewhere and you write. But that's not what it was like. It was more like, something's, you come up with a scene in the middle of the night on a Tuesday and they're shooting it on a Wednesday. You're changing dialogue for something that's going to be shooting tomorrow and literally slipping it under the producer or under the actress's door in the middle of the night so that they have sides for the next morning. You have people coming at you from all different directions with, there were a couple of producers who were very, very interested in the sort of the authenticity of the character, to make sure that it was true to the traditional character that was in the magazine, but especially that the world that Robert E. Howard created was represented in a way that was really authentic. But then you had other producers who were just very, very concerned about it being this sort of, I guess you would call it a kick-ass action movie, and that it would appeal to a very wide audience, many of whom had never heard of Conan, other than maybe they might have seen an earlier film, or maybe they might have heard of him, but not really know any of the details. One of the things that Marcus Nispel said in an interview, I was sitting with him in an interview after the movie came out, and he was joking that he was a dog of many leashes. And what he meant by that was that sometimes I think people have this idea of a director being this all-powerful force on set who just creates the movie according to his vision. I think he, by contrast, felt like he was there and he was a dog with like 6 leashes around his neck, and he was being pulled constantly in different directions. No, we want it this way. No, we want it this way. And he had a completely different version. I think his vision of Conan, I certainly don't want to put words in his mouth, but the vision that I got from him as I was working on the film was much more violent and sociopathic than the way the movie ultimately came out. The original Conan, the one from '81, that movie, was reviewed once as Star Wars as if it were written by a sociopath. And he thought that was the greatest thing in the world. He often would direct the film towards the direction of this very violent sort of sociopathic sort of feel to it. Like different other producers went in the other direction. And as you can imagine, that sort of conflicted with a lot of the more complex sort of character-y scenes that I was writing that he thought were a waste of time. So he would sort of zip through those so that he could get back to the war scenes and more beheadings. And that was just part of his vision of the world that was just at odds with other visions. And I think that ultimately the movie that came out, I think there are a lot of good individual pieces of it. But I think one of the reasons that it wasn't always well reviewed, or more often than not poorly reviewed, was because the movie that ultimately was stitched together, in order to give it some sort of unity, a lot had to be left out because it just didn't fit anymore. And a lot of even the pieces that were there, everyone's work wasn't fitting together the way it should, because it felt like when everyone got to Bulgaria and there was that sense of enormous tension, that a lot of the departments and a lot of the people involved in the film were working on different movies. And that was the major problem. It wasn't so much that anybody, at least from my perspective, and the people I worked with, it wasn't that anybody was doing bad work. It was just that everyone was pushing in different directions, and those pieces didn't always fit.
Were you familiar with the Robert E. Howard stuff before you took this gig?
I was. It's funny. My father was really into the horror, fantasy, and science fiction films. He used to take me to a store in Hollywood in the late 70s. There were two. There was one called the Hollywood Book and Poster Shop, and the other one was called Bond Street Books. I can't remember. No, that wasn't it. But both those places had all the actual pulp magazines. You could buy for only a few bucks the amazing stories and all the weird tales magazines that where Robert E. Howard was originally published. Well, I was a little kid at the time, but I loved the really lurid covers that they had. So I would buy all these magazines for a few bucks, and they were falling apart. You would open them up, and the pages would literally crumble in your hands because they were so old. They were, from the 30s. But I started reading them, and there was something really subversive about the stories. They were very violent. They were very sexual. They were very sort of perverse. I was also very taken by H.P. Lovecraft. Those stories had a big effect on me. I didn't really think about them or come back to them until the Conan project came up. But I was already aware of Robert E. Howard's work, and I remembered like Queen of the Black Coast and Red Nails and some of the other stories very, very, very well.
Now, we're roughly about the same age. Did you see Conan the Barbarian when you were growing up?
I did, and it was funny. I remember seeing it. On the one hand, I remember loving certain aspects of it, and then other aspects of it seemed so campy to me. Things about the original that I really liked, and other things about it that film that I don't know, just I found really funny, I guess. It was something about, especially Arnold Schwarzenegger at that moment, was much more of a comic or silly person to me, with his thick accent. Couldn't quite navigate English at the time, yet he was such a specimen to look at. It was a very different movie, but one that I certainly enjoyed.
Now, after Conan, your Conan came out, you famously went on and wrote a little article for Quora about what it's like to kind of be behind a flop, when your movie flops. Uh-huh. Did you get any shit for that?
I got lots of shit for that. It's funny. I've been writing a lot on Quora. Quora sort of just came out. I met the people who founded it, and I really liked a lot of the writers who I met writing on that. But there were also a group of screenwriters who asked and answered questions on the site. I'd already answered a bunch of the questions, and there were about 30 regular screenwriting hopefuls and semi-professionals who were on the site. And when the movie flopped, and that question came up, I decided to write it. And I really thought I was only writing to an audience of about 30 screenwriters. You know, you always in the back of your mind think, oh, there's a possibility this might go viral, but you don't really think it's possible. You don't really think of that as a real possibility. And so I wrote that, and it came from a very sincere place. I was just, and a very also unedited sort of place. Like, in other words, I wasn't writing this to be broadcast everywhere. I was really just relating some of my thoughts upon things flopping the day after to a group that I thought was going to be mostly very small. But I wrote it, I sort of posted it, and I didn't think about anything. I didn't even turn on my computer until the next day. And that's when I realized that it had been picked up by Reddit, and it had been picked up by a bunch of the Hollywood blogs and Hollywood sites that are where everyone reads everything. And I think what ended up happening was, I think the people who are one step removed from the business and the project specifically, it gave me a lot of positive feedback for it, because it was an interesting, you know, people don't often write about what it feels like when a movie flops. Everyone kind of runs away from it. And I tried to, I tried to write something inspirational for other writers who might be experiencing failure or a failure of expectations. And in that sense, it was fairly positive. The thing that I regret ultimately was that I think just one sentence in there I'd written that I thought I'd done a good job on my rewrite, and that I thought I had improved things from the script that I was handed basically going into it, which was true. There were a lot of problems with that script that were the result of, again, what I was talking about earlier. There's these tidal forces. But a lot of people took that as me throwing the other writers under the bus. And, you know, that made me feel terrible because, first of all, that was not my intention. As I said earlier in the interview, the other drafts, the other writers were certainly as talented as I am, and they wrote some really good drafts along the way. But when you're forced to rewrite in a completely different direction than was your intention, and when you have a bunch of people giving you sort of conflicting ideas about where it can go, you know, a screenplay can get really messed up. Through no fault, it wasn't their fault so much as it was the fault of the process. So, and again, because I thought I was talking to 30 people, I didn't explain myself any more clearly than that. And besides, also, it wasn't really my subject. I was just writing an account of how I felt after the movie didn't do as well as at the box office as I'd hoped. There were some people in Hollywood who took it very cynically, who thought I was trying to somehow blame other people for the flop, which I didn't at all. I didn't blame the director. I didn't blame other people for it. I just talked about how it's precisely what we talked about, the idea that when different people have different ideas about what a movie should be, sometimes it doesn't turn out that well. But again, just saying that sentence I just said now could be interpreted as me saying, it was the director's fault. Oh, it was these producers' fault. Oh, it was these executives' fault. You know, writers love to blame executives in the studio for changing their screenplay. But that wasn't my intention. My intention was, number one, to indicate that when everyone can agree on what movie to make, it usually doesn't turn out that well. But also the fact that, you know, you work for years on these things. And when you're working on them in Bulgaria, you're working for 20 hours a day, getting no sleep, for weeks and weeks in a row. You're putting all your best efforts into it, and you're throwing all your passion into it. You're, regardless of how it ultimately turns out, you're bringing your A game every day. And so are other people. So is the costume designer. So is the stunt coordinator. So are a lot of the actors. And of course, nobody sees that when you see it. All you see is the final film. And so it's heartbreaking when you see the final film. It gets bad reviews, and you realize, okay, those reviews are pretty accurate, but there's nothing you can do about it. That's just. And I drew the comparison to a political campaign, where a bunch of people can all work on a campaign where they feel they're right on the issues, where they feel they put in everything that they have. But sometimes, for various reasons, the campaign doesn't work out, and your guy loses, and that can be heartbreaking. But when you're a filmmaker and when you're a writer, what you ultimately do is you go on to the next campaign. You get up the next morning, and you start working on whatever it is that you're working on next, and you continue to bring your A game to whatever you're working on, whether it's a little independent film, whether it's a movie that you have complete control over, where you're the writer-director, or whether you're just doing rewrites on some straight-to-video sequel. You just have to keep coming back to the work with renewed sense of this is my craft, and no matter what I'm working on, I'm going to bring everything I have to the table, and that's why it really appealed to everyone outside of a very narrow circle of people in Hollywood. That particular article that I wrote.
What are you working on these days?
A lot of feature writers like myself, over the years, have been watching a lot of what's happening on television, and while at the same time, while working on features, and I'm working on a feature spec right now that's in a little bit of that swords fantasy space, different than Conan or Hercules, but we're also working a lot on TV projects because the opportunities in TV, because there are so many channels and so many venues and so much stuff being made, are just much wider. The problem for a lot of screenwriters right now is that the movies that are getting made are either in these $160 million budgets where only a few writers can work on it, and they're usually the A-list writers, or they are, $1 million movies, micro-budget movies, in which there's no real way for the writer to make a living. A lot of us made our bread and butter writing projects and selling projects that were in that sort of $10 million to $30 million range. This is, 10 years ago. And that sort of middle class of filmmaking, whether it's art house cinema or even genre films or dramas, in that middle range has completely disappeared, so that there just isn't the opportunity in films to do what you used to do. And we're looking at TV and seeing these amazing character-driven shows being produced that have these long arcs, and you're seeing all sorts of different types of shows, some at very small budgets made for smaller platforms and smaller networks, and other ones for bigger ones. And there are constantly more and more people, more and more companies like Amazon and Netflix and even other digital platforms like Xbox and others that keep coming to the table. So there's this sense of television series being this larger world that it keeps expanding, while there's the sense in movies of the pie sort of constantly shrinking. The movie business always seems to be making less money every year, and there's more and more emphasis on these sort of tentpole blockbusters. Like a lot of screenwriters, I'm becoming more interested in TV. I wrote a pilot that I sold to the CW with a partner of mine last year, and this year I have another spec pilot that I've written, and will write more throughout the year. So those are the types of things that I'm working on now.
And then you're also teaching at the same time, right?
Yeah, I teach at USC Film School, where I went. I came back to teach, and that's always a real treat for any writer to go back. And I only teach one class a week, and it alternates between a class on writing the feature script and then a class on rewriting. One of the reasons I got so much work over the last 15 years, and I've been steadily employed every year of my life, and I'm very grateful for that, really has to do not with the movies that were made that you see on my IMDb list, but a lot of original spec projects or smaller writing assignments where I really got to write the kind of material that I'm most passionate about. What can be frustrating about the real world and the entertainment business is oftentimes none of those movies actually get made. But when you're teaching, you can stay a little bit, it's a little bit of an ivory tower, and you can stay in that world of, okay, let's just all get together and write up the stories that we're most passionate about, the things that we know the most about. And let's look at screenwriting from this idealized perspective of, what's going to make the best movie. We're not going to worry about budgets. We're not going to worry about what the star wants or what the feud between the director and the studio. We're just going to concentrate on making the best screenplay possible. And that's a wonderful place to be. It keeps me in touch with what inspired me to become a filmmaker in the first place. And it also gives me a chance to help developing writers who are just emerging, because some of them are incredibly talented. There are students who have come through my class that it's just been a joy to read their scripts and to give them a bunch of tools to make their scripts better. Screenwriting as a craft, in terms of like the actual tools that you can teach and the actual practices that you can give to students, it's not rocket science. It's not as though I'm teaching atomic physics. Most of those things are very simple. And a lot of things I teach have more to do with just the discipline of how to approach and reapproach things. And then it's just about trying to identify students who are really talented and inspiring them and saying, no, you're really good. I know this is really hard and most people fail at this particular world and it's really scary to go out there, but you need to keep trying because you're really good. This is what's really good about your writing. You need to do more of it. And this is where you need to improve. If you can just fix this, it'll be even better. There's something really inspiring about that. It keeps me in touch with anybody who gets into the filmmaking and lasts and stays with it for a long career. Got into it because something about films lit some sort of very deep passion in them when they were younger, and it's something that's burned throughout their lives. You always want to stay connected to that original inspiration and that original passion. And one of the ways that I'm able to do that is to work with emerging writers because they have that passion, and also because I can be of genuine use to them. They may be talented in 100 different ways, but there's also stuff that they don't know. There's also horrible mistakes that you can make as a screenwriter that I've made over the last 15 or 20 years, and I can teach them ways of avoiding those pitfalls. And so it gives you a sense of, okay, I made a difference. Even if my movie flopped, I made a difference in this person's career. Even if the movie that I wrote was completely overhauled and changed into something that I now hate, I can go back to USC and go to my class and see somebody else's passion get whipped up into a frenzy and watch them rewrite their script over and over again, and it just gets better with each rewrite. And that's exciting to me.
So thank you to Mr. Hood for coming on the show and talking to us about the Secret Life of Conan the Barbarian 2011. I took a long time before I saw Conan the Barbarian 2011, and I don't necessarily know why, but then when I saw it, yeah, I can kind of see why it took me a while. I definitely didn't see it in theaters. I think I might have rented it on DVD, and I wasn't really impressed. What about you guys?
You are a stronger man than I. I caught it on cable one night, caught it right at the beginning. 20 minutes in, I went, nope, I don't hate myself this much, and I turned it off. So I've only seen the first 20 minutes, and I couldn't do it. I'm like, this is not Conan. This is not Conan.
Yeah, for me, I actually did see it in the theater because I was such a Conan fan. And honestly, going into this, it felt like they were getting so many things right. And then you heard it was going to be PG-13, and you're like, okay, but maybe they can still get away with it. And I remember after seeing it in the theater, thankfully, I didn't see it in 3D because, as a friend described it, you know how they'll in the post-conversion jobs they'll try to layer flat shots to make it look 3D. They said that one of the layer effects they did was Ron Perlman's beard was actually on a separate plane than the rest of his face, which is kind of hilarious.
That same complaint. I heard that same complaint, honestly. I heard Liam Neeson's, they did the same thing in Clash of the Titans to Liam Neeson, that they're like, his facial hair is going to kill me.
But having seen it in theaters, I was tremendously disappointed that I went in with high expectations because I love the character, and I do feel it's a character that does lend itself to remakes. There have been a lot of different versions of Conan over the years. I was okay with them retreading this ground, telling a new Conan story. It's a serialized pulp character. You're meant to keep telling stories with this character. And it was just so incredibly disappointing. Now, later I would go on to view it on home video, and my opinion of the movie softened somewhat. Maybe it's because I've seen so many truly goddamn terrible sword and sorcery films. But the thing is, there was actually more craft into these things than a lot of the other crap that I've seen. Because when I've seen a lot of bad sword and sorcery movies, I'm not kidding. I've seen a ton of them. Almost everything the Italians have made with a slightly muscly guy with a sword in hand, I probably have seen it. And this film, the worst thing I can say about it is that it's relatively uninspired. There are some scenes where there is potential showing through, but ultimately it just gets up its own ass and doesn't really deliver anything of true substance. This world doesn't feel like it has the same kind of lifeblood, the same pulse it was so infused into the Milius film. It's too goddamn glossy.
Not just that, but there's also the fact that it feels too, and I'm only going off the 20 minutes I've seen, too modern. That it was full of quick cuts, modern thing, full of sweeping camera moves that are clearly aided by the computer, full of obvious CG. I'm not talking about I hate all CGI. It's obvious CGI. It seems like this was made for the idiots who just want to go to the multiplex and go, let's go see something cool for an hour. And it's like, no, you can do that with a Matrix film. There's no depth there. Don't do that with a Conan film. Because I've heard younger people that have seen the 2011 Conan first, they call Milius's film boring.
I am willing in a Conan movie to simply have a pure popcorn experience with it, but maybe it's just my own proclivities that I couldn't have that with this movie. There was very little that actually engaged with me on that level. Now, again, I think when I first saw it, I was holding it to too high of a standard, and upon subsequent watchings, I'm a little bit more forgiving of the film. It's not a film that I feel inclined to go back and revisit all that often, because there is nothing too terribly distinctive about the movie.
Can I ask you a question then?
Go for it.
After the 20 minutes that I've seen, does the camera ever fucking stop moving?
No,
throughout the entire film?
No, but part of that can just be attributed to the filmmaker. If I remember correctly, it was the same guy who did the remake of Friday the 13th. What is his name?
Marcus Nispel.
Yeah.
One of the most uninspiredly... Only in Hollywood do you get to fail upwards.
Well, it helps if you're, the go-to guy for Michael Bay. Nispel got made his bones under the Platinum Dune, so yeah.
I have a hard time following this film just because I get so bored while the film is on that I'm just like, well, what's happening again? Why is Rose McGowan got that huge forehead? I don't necessarily understand this. It's like this movie is filled with actors that I kind of like. Like, I like Stephen Lang. I love Ron Perlman. I really like Rose McGowan. And, Momoa, I think he does a pretty good job with what he has, but it just feels like he doesn't have enough to work with. And from the Hood interview, it sounds like Nispel was all about shooting battle scenes and didn't want to give us anything character driven. And then the character stuff just feels like it's kind of wedged in there. And it's like, yeah, this doesn't work on any kind of level. I mean,
the editing doesn't help.
No, there's some great action scenes in Conan the Barbarian, the Milius version, but those are subsequent to the building of a world, the creation of the character, all this kind of stuff. And I'm even just going to the very opening of the film, they say that Conan was born on the battlefield. That could be a metaphor. It doesn't necessarily have to be literal, guys. And that scene, and then so many people complained about the Milius version, like staying on young Conan for too long, like waiting for us to meet, the regular, like Arnold Conan. We don't see Momoa in the movie for quite a while. And it's like there's so much stuff that happens before we get to Momoa's character. It's like, okay, if you guys were going to learn anything from the past, one of the gripes that people had, if you're going to make this modern film, I mean, again, it's a reimagining. You don't have to tell the whole origin story again. It's like we get so caught up in origin stories these days, but I guess this, again, falls into this like superhero kind of thing where it's like, oh, well, you got to know how, did a radioactive spider bite this guy? Is that why he's so great? We got to know it right up front.
There's way too much going on in a frame. Like George Lucas was so proud of Attack of the Clones, where at one point he mentioned when they were in the not Blade Runner city at the beginning, he's like, there's almost 1,000 different things moving in the frame at any given moment, and you're going, that's too much. Stop.
Yeah.
It's too noisy.
Yeah, and I always have to wonder about this recent batch of action directors that seem to have no faith in an action sequence because they're overly edited. The camera does not let you see what is actually going on. And you got to feel for some of the performance in this because they probably spent a fair amount of time learning their choreography, but you'll be fucked if you know because they've cut it to shit.
I used to say that 13 Ghosts, the Dark Castle remake, was the most schizophrenically edited movie I'd ever seen. I said, well, now I've seen a movie edited by a blind man. Of what I saw from Conan, it seemed like it was trying to one-up that.
Well, it's all fitting into this whole sort of chaos cinema aesthetic where one can almost understand the logic behind it. The idea that battles are supposed to be these chaotic, frenetic things, and they're trying to capture that aesthetic with the editing style and the camera technique. However, I find that entire aesthetic to be repulsive. As a fan of action, I want to be able to see action. A greatly constructed action sequence could elevate a movie. It should tell a story and be more than simply the implication of emotion. That I think that great action sequences should, again, have a plot to them, a beginning, middle, and end, particularly if the entire movie is barreling towards a final confrontation between a big bad guy and a good guy. You gotta be able to tell a plot in the action. And they don't. They just don't in these movies anymore. And it really does make me angry.
I don't like things now compared to the way they used to be.
I don't see a single vision when it comes to Conan the Barbarian 2011, which really kind of makes me sad because, Milius, one of his projects was supposed to be the sequel to Conan. It was supposed to be King Conan, Crown of Iron. We would finally get that thing that Mako teases at the end of Conan. We would get that story of Conan becoming king by his own hand. And, that was the draft I have of that was May 24th, 2001. And unfortunately, just life got in the way. Milius ends up having a stroke. All these things happen. I mean, Schwarzenegger is one of those guys who his name gets attached to so many projects. I mean, the Crusade film that, Cameron wanted to make all those years ago. So many different things have had his name on it over the years. He was supposed to be in one of the original Planet of the Apes remakes, all this kind of stuff.
I remember that. I actually think that was the Oliver Stone one, when Oliver Stone was going to remake Planet of the Apes. I actually think that was the Arnold one. But I want to point this out. I just looked this up. The Conan 2011, and this is the reason everything is still so by committee. 16 different producers, 7 of which are credited as executive producers. How you can't make a movie like that. And first of all, how do you have more than one executive producer? Isn't executive producer kind of the point that the buck stops with me? If you have 7 of them, none of them are really executive producer, are they? I just want to point that out.
So on Conan the Barbarian, you had 2 executive producers. You had Raffaele De Laurentiis and you had Ed Pressman. So definitely you've got probably the purse strings and then the guy who's making the decisions. I'm not sure how much Raffaele was doing on that one in particular. I mean, I know that Dune was her baby, and that was still a few years away. So I'm not sure what her role was in comparison to Pressman's. But 2 people versus how many executives for 2011?
7 executive producers.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
And I'm looking at their names, and I'm not noticing one name on this producer list that I even recognize. You know how normally you can pull up an executive producer? Oh, okay, I know his work. I don't recognize a single one of these names without clicking on them. And even then I'm going, don't know that, don't know that, don't know that.
I think Boaz Davidson was one of the producers, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm looking at this, and I'm like, okay, the executive produced Expendables 2, 300 Rise of an Empire, Mega Snake. It's like, okay, your credits aren't exactly impressive. So I just want to say, yes, that's why I think it felt like it was made by committee, because it was.
And I have the feeling that the new one, because they still talk about doing, bringing back Arnold and having him in this.
With The Rock as his son. That's the last one I heard.
Oh, Jesus.
Or was it Vin Diesel as his son? It was one of them.
Well, Vin Diesel would kind of make sense. I mean, we talked on you did a retrospective of all the Riddick films, and that end of Chronicles of Riddick so reminds me of the end of Conan.
Oh,
that whole, him,
the body posture,
Oh, God. Yeah.
And he's such a gigantic geek anyway that that was what was going through his mind when he was doing that scene.
But yeah, as of like February 6th, there was a new story about this Legend of Conan film where it was new writer Will Beall will be rewriting the script. So now that's 3 versions of the script I think we have. So that we've got Chris Morgan as a writer, Andrea Berloff as a writer, and now this Will Beall guy as a writer. So it's like, yeah, we're probably not off to a good start. Again, no singular vision.
All we have to do now is add Jason Blum as executive producer, since he executive produced every goddamn film that comes out nowadays.
What's that guy's name? Akiva Goldsmith? I think we need him in there.
Oh, Akiva Goldsman. Okay, his Academy Award is a proof of how stupid the Academy Awards are. There's no possible way the same guy that wrote Batman and Robin and in Lost in Space and every other bad film of the 90s also wrote A Beautiful Mind. No, he put his name on someone else's script.
I refuse to read the version of Batman vs. Superman that Akiva Goldsman rewrote that was Andrew Kevin Walker's original draft. It's like, if I can find that original, I'll read that. But I do not want to read anything that he does. Yeah, Goldsman is just terrible.
What, Mike? I think I'm going to put a challenge out to you and me. Akiva Goldsman wrote a book on screenwriting. We should both read that and do an episode about it.
Maybe he's a really, really nice guy, but I'm not a real big fan of his work. Did either of you guys see Solomon Kane?
Yes.
No. What did you think?
It was an interesting film, particularly since it took forever to be released in the States. I mean, I think it hit Europe years before it finally came over here. I liked the darker tone they took with it. It did have a lot of these rather stereotypical CGI constructs that we've been seeing in so many films up until this point, but it definitely was a much more gritty approach to the material, which stands to reason because Solomon Kane is a much different character than what we would find with Conan.
Yeah, no, I saw it recently. It's streaming on Netflix, and yeah, I thought it was all right, but I don't know. It felt like maybe there was a different version of it at some point. I don't know which draft I saw, kind of thing. But yeah, it was. I like the whole idea of when he finally kicks ass. It's great.
Oh, yeah.
But he spends so much of the movie not kicking ass. It's like, okay.
It's definitely one of those films, because every film is like that these days, where we're setting up a franchise, and I could have seen sequels if they had made them. I would have been willing to see another Solomon Kane film, but I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Unfortunately, I kept getting Solomon Kane and Jonah Hex. Speaking of Akiva Goldsman, I kept getting those mixed up in my head for some reason. I don't know why.
That's those 2-word names.
Yeah, and when I would see the posters for Solomon Kane, I kept thinking of our good friend Kevin Sorbo for some reason. Oh. So, yeah, it was just the poster. I was like, is that Kevin Sorbo? I don't recognize who this person is.
God may not be dead, but his career is.
Oh, yeah.
So I talked to probably one of 3 of the biggest Robert E. Howard fans that I know. And actually, I know them through you, El Goro, for turning me on to the Cromcast, a podcast dedicated solely to the works of Robert E. Howard. I think they just started their 3rd season now, and they're looking at the works of their Howard's Solomon Kane character. So very timely when it comes to that. So let's play that interview, and then we can wrap up and get out of here with this epic episode.
My name's Josh Adkins. I live in Kentucky, and I'm a lab coordinator at university here in Lexington, Kentucky. And in my spare time, I'm a podcaster with my good buddies Luke and John. And when you put a little bit of each of those 3 personalities into a bowl and stir it up and add a little bourbon, you get the Cromcast. I suppose you got to add some Robert E. Howard there too, though.
How long have you guys been doing the Cromcast?
Well, we started in the summer of 2013, so we're about 1.5 years in. And, it all got started because we were fans of podcasts. Luke, especially, he started listening to stuff, I don't know, before John and I delved into the hobby. We were listening to stuff like the Splattercast and Word Balloon with John Suntress, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. It's just something to have on it's interesting. It helps time move a little faster when you're in the lab doing stuff. And we all sort of were looking for the creative outlet, and it took us a really long time to put together, hey, we really like podcasts. We're interested in sword and sorcery and sci-fi and fantasy. And Robert E. Howard does not have a podcast, which doesn't seem fair because Clark Ashton Smith had a podcast. H.P. Lovecraft has an awesome podcast. The H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast is just great. And we thought, that's really a travesty because Howard was so prolific, so good, deserves to be remembered, deserves to be talked about even today. And so we put together the plan, I guess, laid the framework for the Cromcast and put out our first episode, I think, in June of 2013.
Now, are all three of you guys scientists?
Yeah, we're all scientists at various academic institutions throughout the U.S.
What branches are you studying?
Entomology. And so we're all three bug guys, I guess.
Why Howard, and how have you applied the scientific method to what you've done?
Howard, like I said, he was so prolific. The dude committed suicide at age 30, but before that time, he wrote something on the order of 300 stories, 800 or so poems. I'm not certain the exact numbers, but in those ballparks. And of those stories, I think are just north of 100 were published. And so each of us came to Howard through Conan, much like probably everyone does. We were fans of the movie, fans of the comics, and had honestly never read any of the original stories. And, I don't know if you guys have read any of the original stories in preparation for this episode of The Projection Booth. But if you haven't, you really owe it to yourself to just take a few minutes and sit down with a bourbon and a Conan story, and I guarantee you're going to have an awesome time. They just, I don't know how to describe the energy that they give off. We talk about, the way these stories sort of are cinematic in the way that the characters seem to move and live and breathe on their own, sort of jumping off of the page. It's something that you can really easily imagine from a cinematic perspective, I think. As far as the scientific method goes, I think that our background in science sort of helps us analyze the structure of the stories, sort of helps us break down patterns that we see across these stories, recurring themes. Those things pop out at us, and we spend some time talking about that on the show. But one really cool thing about Howard is in a few of his stories, especially the Conan stories, he talks about scientific processes like evolution. He talks about scientific processes like plate tectonics. And this is a time, and I guess you could still say this today, but evolution was not widely accepted, right, during the 1930s. And there are several Conan stories. One that leaps out in particular is The Queen of the Black Coast, which is a classic. And in that story, there is this civilization of people that Howard describes as sort of rising up in terms of evolutionary progress out of apedom, and then at their zenith becoming corrupted by something and then devolving. And so that's not really how evolution works. But the fact that he featured evolution so prominently in his fiction, I think speaks to how widely read he was.
Now, you guys have started on your third season. How do you kind of divide these things up as far as what a season is? Is it a number of episodes, or is it kind of looking at a particular topic and utilizing that as a season break?
We sort of organize our seasons around topics. And so far, the first season, obviously the best place in Howard's bibliography to jump in, the most accessible place was Conan. And so our entire season one was a discussion of the Conan stories, the John Milius Conan film. And Luke put together a really awesome Conan versus heavy metal episode where we picked out about 8 or so songs, and each of those songs from various artists sort of were influenced by or make reference to some Conan story. And so the entire first season is dedicated to Conan. And after that, we wanted to sort of take a step back and think about where to go next. And one thing that popped out at us was, in a lot of the Conan stories, the female characters are just sort of cheesecakey sex objects. But in a lot of them, Queen of the Black Coast, one that I just mentioned, and several others, feature prominently really strong female characters. And so we decided, what if we focus our second season on the female characters of Robert E. Howard and females in pulp fiction, pulp fantasy from the 30s? And needless to say, that made us really nervous because we're 3 dudes and, we don't really have that female perspective. But Howard created the character, or at least the impetus for the character, Red Sonja. And Howard's Red Sonja is a lot different than the comic Red Sonja, who's a lot different than the movie Red Sonja. But he also created this character named Dark Agnes, Helen Tavrill, the pirate, several compelling female characters who don't just sort of melt at the sight of iron thews, right? That was pretty cool and pretty interesting. And now we're in the middle, like you said, of our third season, focusing on Solomon Kane. And I think a lot of people, if you say Robert E. Howard, if they're familiar with him, they'll first say, oh, Conan. And then maybe tangentially sort of say Solomon Kane too. So I think Solomon Kane is maybe the next most recognizable character that Howard created. And he's interesting, man. It's, these Kane stories were written a few years before the Conan stories, where it's cool to sort of see this development of Howard's ideas, of his tropes, of his ability to set a scene and write fight scenes. He can write fight scenes like no one else.
Where does Solomon Kane fit in the evolution of Robert E. Howard as a writer? Like, what did he have particular eras as far as, I'm going to write Kull stories, I'm going to write Kane stories, I'm going to write Conan stories, or were they kind of mixed together, or how did that work?
Well, the Conan stuff was actually later on in Howard's life, and I think that he sort of wrote based upon what the market was dictating. He was trying to become a professional writer, and he was doing this by, writing for the pulps. And it wasn't always easy to get stuff accepted into the pulps, especially weird tales. He sort of wrote whatever would sell. Now, as far as eras, I believe that Kull is pretty early on in the chronology or in the bibliography of Robert E. Howard. And then you've got Solomon Kane. You can see from those two characters how Conan sort of evolved, just from the breakneck speed of some of the fight scenes, the descriptions of both Kull and Solomon Kane. Howard used a lot of sort of feline descriptors, panther-like, tiger-like, tigerish. There was an episode in the first season early on where we sort of played a drinking game with cat adjectives. He used a lot of them. And so both of those two action heroes, I think, sort of merged together to help form Conan, not so much in their personalities, but in the way that Howard learned to put together an action scene and to describe that and make it just jump off of the page.
When it comes to the podcast, one of the features that you have on there is the one thing. For folks who aren't familiar with the Cromcast, what is the one thing?
One thing. In an effort to keep us from going on and on and on about non-Conan, non-Robert E. Howard things, and in an effort to sort of focus us, rather than jumping into, hey, what have you guys been doing this week? What's been going on? What's new? We sort of instituted the one thing. And that's, you get to make a recommendation, whether it's a video game or a book or a movie or something that you really think that is special that you want to share with anyone who might be listening in. And so the one thing sometimes becomes two things, but it was just our way of our silly way, I guess, of trying to keep the show on track and not going off topic too much.
When it comes to Howard himself, so far, and I know you're not done exploring his bibliography, but what's the one thing that you want people to go and check out immediately? What's that one story that is going to blow their socks off and make them a Robert E. Howard fan?
I think that it depends on what you're into. If you are already into, fantasy, sword and sorcery stories, then you have to read The Tower of the Elephant. It's a really one of the shorter Conan stories, and it's excellent. If you want something a little bit longer, you've got to read Beyond the Black River, which is another Conan tale, but it could also be a Western. And it features Conan and our point of view character sort of behind Pictish enemy lines. And this is a story we discussed with Mark Finn, who is the author of Blood and Thunder, which is, I think, the Robert E. Howard biography. If you read one Howard biography, make sure it's Blood and Thunder. And Mark sort of took us through the story and let us in on some really cool Texas history that influenced the development of that story. And so there were some conflicts between Texans and Native Americans that really informed this story Beyond the Black River, and it's awesome. So if you want to see a good Conan story, if you want to read a good Conan story, definitely go to those two first. That's my recommendation. I think Luke might have some different ones. Maybe John would have some different ones. But for my money, those are two of the best. Now, if you're a horror fan and you've never read Pigeons from Hell, you have to read it. You have to stop what you're doing and read this story. It's Southern Gothic horror at its finest. And this story was born from, I think, some back and forth communication between Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft. And Lovecraft suggested that, there's nothing as terrifying as the secrets of old New England. And being the old gentleman from Providence, he sort of was saying New England's better than everywhere else. And Howard said, okay, I'm going to write a story that's going to scare your pants off. And he wrote Pigeons from Hell, which is a really cool story about voodoo and black magic and revenge and horrible family secrets and a zombie. And it's very, very cool. So I would recommend checking both of those stories out. And in the interest of not just going on and on and on, I think I'll make those my three recommendations.
Those three things are your one thing.
Those three things are my one thing.
How easy or difficult is it to find Robert E. Howard stories versus Robert E. Howard as translated by or as obfuscated by DeCamp?
Yeah. L. Sprague DeCamp took a lot of Howard stories, I think, during the 60s and 70s, and made his own edits, took fragments that were not yet completed, that Howard didn't complete in his lifetime, finished them himself, called them posthumous collaborations. I think it's hard to collaborate with someone posthumously. And so those are out there, and for a really long time it was hard to find any pure Howard. Today, that's not really the case. There are lots of excellent collections from Del Rey, and these are the collections that we use for the show. And there are I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, 3 Conan collections that collect I believe, 20 Conan stories that Howard wrote during his life. There's also a volume of Cull, a volume of Solomon Kane, and I'm looking at Bran McMorn. But there are also others. And they're all pure Howard. No edits, no additions, no takeaways. It's all pure Robert E. Howard. And so it's easier than it used to be. Now, there are also collections from the Robert E. Howard Foundation. And I believe that website is rehfoundation.org. And they are limited print series. They're a little pricey, but they're bound very nicely, really nice paper. These are really nice collectible books, limited series. And you can get stories in these collections that you can't find anywhere else. And again, they're all pure Howard. So I would say I'm not certain when this resurgence in pure Howard began, But I think in the last 10 to 15 years, it's become remarkably easier. And with the web, there are lots of online sources like Project Gutenberg, where you can get some of Howard's stories, not all, but some collections, those that are in the public domain. And you can access those for free. And I think that those are unedited, pure Howard.
What is going to be next for you guys? I mean, there's so much that he still has left for you guys to explore. Where are you going to go? What's season 4 going to be like?
We've got a few ideas, one of which is to include other authors, other pulp authors from that era, and discuss the prevalence of lost continents in these stories, not just Howard, but others as well. And it might give us an opportunity to talk about maybe Tarzan. We can pull in some Lovecraft and talk about the Call of Cthulhu and these continents, these island continents that sink and rise above the waves. And we can pull in some of Howard's stories like Skullface, which deal with antagonists that are from ancient Atlantis. That's one idea. We've also talked about talking about Howard's fight stories. Even though he's widely considered the father of sword and sorcery, he wrote in a number of diverse genres. We talked about the horror stuff, but he also wrote a ton of historical fiction, funny short stories, detective stories, and westerns. But one genre that I think gets left out a lot, and I wasn't even aware of until I started this project with my buddies, was Howard's fight stories. He wrote a ton of boxing stories, and just I still haven't read any of them, but I can imagine that with, from the way that he wrote Conan and those fight scenes in those stories, that these fight tales are probably just hard to put down, frenetic, action-packed, and awesome. So, we've got a couple of ideas. We haven't really decided what to do next because we're solidly sort of in the middle of the Solomon Kane stuff, and I'm still pretty excited about those stories, and I know the other guys are as well.
Now, I know that you reach out into other media. You talked about the heavy metal episode, and I know that you've covered Conan the Barbarian, the film, and Red Sonja, the film, when you're doing these episodes. First off, let me apologize that you're going to have to watch Solomon Kane, the film, for an episode.
Yeah, we're going to have to. We're going to do it.
Do you go into other things like the comic books when it comes to the Conan stories?
Yeah, we do have a comic book episode. Our friend and excellent comic book artist Justin Stewart joined us for that one, and we talked about not just the stories, but we were discussing the old savage sword of Conan art, and there's a ton of excellent black and white art in those pages. You can get those pretty easily. I believe Dark Horse Comics owns the rights to all the Conan stuff now. And there are these large Yellow Pages style collections that are, 200-300 pages long that collect like a dozen or 15 stories. And they're just chock full of art from people like Ancala and other Puerto Rican artists of that era. That stuff is really good, man. I don't know if you've read any of them. I recommend them, though.
I've been reading the Savage Sword, the collections of those, but yeah, that's it so far as that goes. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. There's so much stuff that I need to read or want to read when it comes to this, not only the Conan stories themselves, the comic books, but then the scholarship that was written about Conan, and then of course I just am wrapping up Mark Finn's biography, and then there's the Paul Sammon book. So there's just so much that needs to be explored.
Yeah, it's amazing that all of this material is out there and available. It wasn't always the case, and I think. And, I am not, and the other guys will back me up on this. We're not Howard scholars, I think. I think we're fans. And, clearly we haven't read everything yet, but from what we've read, we really love. And of course, there have been some stories that we haven't enjoyed so much, and we've talked about that as well. But even the really bad stories are better than a lot of the stuff that you would find in this era of pulps. And you mentioned the scholarship stuff. Mark Finn's book is an awesome resource, but Don Herron, who is an excellent Robert E. Howard scholar, wrote two, or I shouldn't say he wrote, he edited 2 excellent volumes of Howard scholarship, and they're called The Dark Barbarian and The Barbaric Triumph. And just after Christmas, a few weeks ago, Amazon released the Kindle edition of those 2 books collected together, along with a ton of other essays. It's not all Conan stuff. It's Howard scholarship. And you can get that in Kindle format for $5.99. And those books are really hard to come by these days.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I kind of have an axe to grind. I guess I'm using that because of Conan, against Don Herron, because he had written a book about one of my favorite authors, Charles Willeford, and the book is called Charles Willeford by Don Herron, but I had made a joke that it should be called Don Herron by Don Herron just because it is so about him.
Yeah.
And as I'm reading the introduction to that Kindle version of this this book that you're recommending, there's a line in there about, Don Herron is getting a lot of flack lately because he's such a great self-promoter. And I'm like, whew, at least it's not just me.
No, I don't think it's just you at all. But, the good news is there's a ton of other content in there from Howard scholars. It runs the gamut. I think Mark Finn's got an essay in there. Jeffrey Shanks also, maybe. It's great. There's also, I think it's Fritz Leiber. There's a short essay about sword and sorcery, the genre as a whole, written by Leiber, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, no, it is a tremendous book, and I'm very glad. Thank you for recommending that, and thank you so much for all the help you've given me as far as putting this podcast together kind of behind the scenes, recommending different stories, and then just having the Cromcast as a reference is just amazing to be able to hear about these stories and to get different perspectives about these stories. And, of course, thanks to El Goro for turning me on to the Cromcast. So it's all kind of feeding each other.
Yeah, that's very kind, man. Thank you so much. We wanted this show to sort of be a testament to Howard himself. And, his work stands alone. It stands on its own. And I think sometimes, and, I think the Howard scholarship community might not be happy if I say this, but it's not easy to access. It's not easy to get. Firstly, until the Kindle edition of those books was uploaded to Amazon, it was tough to get those essays. But it's also tough to access. It's a very sort of insular community, and I think that we're approaching it in a way that a fan might approach it. Someone who's really interested, really passionate about really good pulp style adventure stories. And we just want to bring folks to it who maybe, you've seen the Conan movie, maybe you grew up and watched the Conan cartoon, or you've got a few issues of the comic, from your dad or your brother's collection, but you've never really read any Howard. We wanted this to sort of be a portal to access some other Howard stuff and sort of get your bearings, because that dude wrote a ton of excellent stories, and sometimes it's really hard to get your bearings.
So where can people find the Cromcast?
Well, you can find us on the web at thecromcast.blogspot.com. We're also on Twitter, twitter.com/thecromcast. We have a Facebook page as well, and you can listen to us on the Stitcher app. We're on iTunes as well. So I think we're pretty easy to find as long as you search for Cromcast and not Chromecast.
All right, thanks to Josh from the Cromcast for coming on and talking to me about what that show is all about. I highly recommend that. Of course, we will have links over to where folks can go out and sign up for that show, download episodes, and just enjoy the madness that these guys are engaged in, going through every week and looking at a different Robert E. Howard story. So I want to thank this week's special guests. Thank you, Josh, for coming on, kind of my pinch hitter here. Thank you, El Goro, for showing up for this one. El Goro, what have you been up to now that the El Año del Santo is done? What have you been up to over at Talk Without Rhythm?
Same thing I've always been doing since I launched the show. Just try to find two films that are tangentially related and discuss them with people that are willing to come on the show. At the time of this recording, we just recorded episode 256, which, because of its connection to computing, we decided to discuss The Matrix and the Zero Theorem and get rather drunk and discuss some of the philosophical implications of those films.
Zero Theorem, nice.
Yeah,
I still have to watch that.
It is, if you are a fan of Gilliam, it is very much worth it.
Brazil is one of my favorite films of all time. Director's cut only.
Then you may very well love this film because it is very much of a piece with what he did with Brazil.
Awesome.
Well, now you're going to have to go see Jupiter Ascending since he makes a little cameo appearance in there.
I read about that. No. I will never willingly pay for a Channing Tatum movie, ever.
I saw it. I was there.
You don't hate Channing Tatum as much as I do.
You hate a lot of things, Josh.
That's what I do.
And where do you share your hatred for folks who want to listen to more of it?
1201beyond.com is where all of my hatred is focused. And our illustrious host here is a frequent guest of my hatred.
Yeah, we'll be talking at the time of this recording. We are, 3 days away from a Best of the Best retrospective. So very excited to talk about that.
We will find out what Best of the Best is Best of the Best.
We're here because you're looking for the best of the best of the best, sir.
All right, so one more thing before we go. We're going to play a preview for next week's show, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to say goodnight.
Love can sure spin your head around. God, where do you begin?
Well, hello.
We must have been meant to be together. It's too bad you have to work tonight.
Only till midnight.
Fate is a funny thing.
Take a nap, because you're going to need all your energy tonight.
It was one of those strange nights.
Finally meet the right girl and you blow it.
That could ruin your whole day. In a big way.
Dad, it's happening. This is it. This is really it. This is the big one.
This is a joke, right?
It's really happening.
This can't be true. We'll all be dead if we don't get out of here. Nobody believes this, do they?
Not me, not Spongy.
Make a list for me. People who we want to bring along.
We gotta get Julie. Who's Julie?
Harry Belafonte.
Who are you? Who are you?
Stop and let me off.
I don't stop for nothing. Jump!
Don't hurt me, man. I got Nakamichi Pioneer. I got everything.
If it doesn't happen, I'll pay you. If what doesn't happen, man? I'm dreaming. That's it, I'm dreaming.
You all ready to go? You the pilot?
Hey, do you know anybody can
fly helicopter? Helicopter pilots.
All the helicopter pilot bars are closed.
What's the problem? It's true.
Love can be exciting.
Trust me with this.
Even terrifying.
Julie! I love you!
But nothing could prepare you for an experience like this.
What is the truth, Harry?
Miracle Mile.
Listen, I'm just a guy who picked up the phone.
That's right. Next week, we are going to be looking at Miracle Mile. Hopefully, we will have director Steve DeJarnette, and we will definitely have actress Olan Jones on the show, and we'll be talking about this great can't call it a post-apocalyptic film. Apocalypse film, I suppose, is the best way to put it.
It's a really good movie.
Yeah, it's a fantastic film. Hopefully folks will come back for that. Find links to the show over at our website, projection-booth.com. I'll have tons and tons of links this week. So many people were involved with this episode. Thanks to everybody for listening, and good night.
day, walking in circles, haunted by memories. I push on this wheel. I pray to Klam, grant me revenge, and help me to answer the riddle of steel. A shy little boy, I couldn't protect them. Helpless and timid, as weak as a girl. They butchered my people, the dogs ate my father, my mother beheaded. They took my whole world. Klam, where is the wizard who killed my mother? Still, I can recall his terrible gaze. Klam, where are the two snakes facing each other? Klam, if you're my god, then show me the way. I'm on the path, chopping up bodies, hacking and slicing, and look at me now. With loyal friends joining my party, each step I take, I'm fulfilling my vow. Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of the women. Hear the lamentation of the women. Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of the women. Hear the lamentation of the women. Klam, show me the wizard who killed my mother. I've never prayed to you before. Still, what would I give if you could help me see this through? And if you do not listen, then the hell with you. Klam, where are the two snakes facing each other? Klam, if you're my god, then show me the way. I swear this wizard will fall, 'cause this has begun. They murdered them all. I'm the last one. I issued the call. Revenge for my mom. I pray to you. Crush your enemies. See them driven before you. And hear the lamentation of the women.
God knows what the guy is doing to a llama.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.